The skies above Stormwind tore open like a wound carved into reality itself. It was no ordinary storm that descended upon Azeroth that fateful evening. The very fabric of existence crackled with golden lightning that struck upward instead of down, as if the world itself rejected some cosmic violation. Thunder rolled not from clouds, but from the spaces between dimensions, a deep rumbling that penetrated bone and soul alike. Citizens stopped in their tracks, eyes drawn skyward as magical wards failed across the city. Enchanted street lamps flickered and died, and the great bell of the Cathedral of Light tolled of its own accord, its deep resonance carrying a warning across the entire kingdom. In the Mage Quarter, Archmage Khadgar collapsed to his knees in his tower, arcane energy sparking wildly around him as every protective enchantment he had woven over decades flared with defensive intensity never before witnessed. The eye of the Guardian around his neck pulsed with violet warning, its gemstone cracking under the psychic pressure. "Kalik," he gasped, his mind overwhelmed by a presence that defied comprehension, tasting like arcane magic but vaster than the Nexus itself. Something comes, something that should not be. In Orgrimmar, Thrall felt the disturbance like a hammer blow to his shamanic senses. The elements themselves screamed in confusion, unable to comprehend what approached. The throne room of Grommash Hold trembled, ancient pillars groaning under some invisible pressure. He reached out to the elements, seeking guidance, but received only chaos in return. The spirits of earth, fire, water, and air recoiled from something that existed beyond their understanding. At the gates of Ice-Crowned Citadel, Bolvar Fordragon, the Lich King, felt a presence that eclipsed even his death-touched consciousness. His flaming eyes widened behind the helm of domination as millions of undead voices in his mind fell silent for the first time since he had donned the cursed crown. "What power is this?" he whispered to the frozen wastes, "that even death itself falls quiet?" In the temple of Elune in Darnassus, High Priestess Tyrande Whisperwind screamed, silver moonlight flaring uncontrollably around her as the goddess's blessings surged through her with painful intensity. Malfurion rushed to her side, his druidic powers connecting him to the dream, where he saw Ysera and the other green dragons stirring in alarm. "The balance," Tyrande gasped, blood trickling from her nose. "Something tips the cosmic scales, something vast beyond measure." The cosmic tear widened above the eastern kingdoms, a rent in reality that spilled impossible golden light across Azeroth's skies. It was not the field green of the Burning Legion's invasions, nor the shadowy purple of void corruption, nor the death gray of the Shadowlands. This light burned with purpose, with uncompromising will, with a cold and terrible certainty that made the very air seem to crystallize and shatter. And then he came through. A figure wreathed in golden armor descended slowly toward the Valley of Heroes, his massive form radiating such power that reality itself seemed to bend and distort around him. Hair as black as the void framed a face of perfect, terrible beauty, eyes burning with the knowledge of millennia. Where his armored boots touched the cobblestones of Stormwind, the stone itself transformed, becoming golden glass that reflected his radiance. The Emperor of Mankind had arrived in Azeroth. His mind, vaster than galaxies, stretched outward, tasting this new reality. This was not his universe, not the galaxy he had spent countless millennia shepherding through the age of strife toward unification. This was something else entirely. A world where magic flowed as naturally as water, where gods walked openly among mortals, where the fabric of reality itself was woven from 6 primal forces in constant tension, where humanity remained fractured, divided between the Alliance and Horde, surrounded by countless other species, each with their own claims to this world. Fascinating and unacceptable. The Emperor's psychic presence, rippled outward like a tsunami, touching every mortal mind within hundreds of miles. Ordinary humans collapsed unconscious in the streets of Stormwind, their unprepared minds unable to withstand even the gentlest probe of his vast consciousness. The more resilient souls, warriors hardened by years of conflict, mages trained in mental disciplines, experienced visions of a golden throne, of a galaxy-spanning empire, of a species united under one indomitable will. In Stormwind Keep, young King Anduin Wrynn gasped and gripped the armrests of his throne as visions flooded his mind. Visions of unity achieved through absolute authority, of peace maintained through overwhelming force, of a humanity that had conquered the stars. His father's sword, Charlemagne, hung on the wall behind him, and for a moment, he could have sworn he felt Varian spirits stir with warning. High above, the Skyfire, flagship of the Alliance fleet, lurched as its engines sputtered and magical propulsion systems failed. Captain Scurry barked orders as her vessel began losing altitude, arcane crystals overloading across all systems. "Get me a location on that energy signature," she shouted, her engineering crews scrambling to restore power. "And someone contact the king now." The Emperor stood in the center of the Valley of Heroes, surrounded by the statues of Azeroth's greatest champions. His psychic senses cataloged this world's powers, its threats, its fundamental nature. He sensed beings of immense power scattered across this world and beyond. Some wielded what they called the Light, a force remarkably similar to his own psychic might, though channeled through faith rather than pure will. Others commanded the elements, negotiated with spirits of nature, drew upon a dimension they called the Emerald Dream. And there were those who trafficked with forces that made even his ancient soul grow wary. The whispers of old gods, entities similar to the chaos gods of his reality, but imprisoned beneath the earth and sea. The field corruption of demons, powered by soul energy and capable of annihilating worlds. The void, an entropic force of madness and dissolution. The shadowlands of death itself, recently breached and barely restored. This world stood at a precipice far more dangerous than its inhabitants realized. Divided, fractured, with powers they barely understood and enemies that threatened extinction on multiple fronts. They required guidance. They required unity. They required him. The first to approach was not a human, but an orc. Thrall materialized in a flash of lightning, the doomhammer crackling with elemental fury in his grip. The former warchief's eyes widened as he beheld the golden giant, sensing power that dwarfed even the aspects in their prime. "I am Thrall, son of Duratan," he announced, his voice steady despite the pressure that threatened to drive him to his knees. "You have entered Azeroth uninvited. State your purpose." The Emperor regarded the green-skinned warrior with interest. Not human, yet possessing intelligence, honor, and shamanic abilities that connected him to this world's elemental forces. In his reality, such a being would be classified as a Xenos, alien, to be either subjugated or destroyed. But here, this orc stood as protector of his people, as champion of a faction that included humans among its ranks. "I am the Emperor of mankind." His voice resonated not just through air, but through the minds of all who could hear, multi-layered and impossibly deep. "I have come to bring unity to humanity, to elevate your species from the chaos of divided allegiances, and to prepare this world for threats you cannot comprehend." Thrall's grip on the Doomhammer tightened. "Humanity on this world is not yours to claim. They have made their own choices, formed their own alliances. The Horde and Alliance may have their differences, but they stand together when Azeroth is threatened." "Together?" The Emperor took a step forward, his armor gleaming with inner light. "You speak of alliance while maintaining separate nations, separate militaries, separate purposes. I have witnessed 10,000 years of such alliances. They hold only until the immediate threat passes, then fracture once more into conflict and competition." Before Thrall could respond, portals of purple energy burst open around the valley. Through them stepped Jaina Proudmoore, her white hair flowing as arcane power crackled around her fingers. Beside her materialized Prophet Velen, the ancient Draenei leader, his connection to the light blazing. From the shadows emerged Matthias Shaw, master of SI-7, daggers already in hand. And from above descended Lady Liadrin, Blood Knight matriarch, mounted on her silver dragonhawk. "Stand down," Jaina commanded, her voice carrying authority earned through decades of leadership. "You've breached Azeroth's defenses and attacked our capital city with some kind of psychic assault. Whatever you are, you're not welcome here." The Emperor observed the assembled defenders with calculating interest. The human woman wielded arcane magic with impressive skill, her power amplified by some kind of focusing crystal. The Draenei radiated light energy comparable to the greatest saints of his ecclesiarchy. The human rogue possessed enhanced abilities that suggested either mutation or magical augmentation, and the blood elf, clearly not human despite her similar form, channeled the light through martial discipline rather than faith. "I have attacked no one," the Emperor stated calmly. "My mere presence overwhelms unprepared minds. This is not hostility, but inevitability. I am to your psychics what the sun is to a candle." Jaina's hands wove complex patterns as she prepared a spell. "Khadgar warned me about you. He says your energy signature is similar to arcane magic, but fundamentally different, operating on principles we don't understand. Because you are children playing with forces beyond your comprehension," the Emperor replied. "What you call arcane magic, I recognize as a form of psychic manipulation of reality. What you term the light is collective faith given form. The Fel is soul energy weaponized. You have stumbled upon fragments of cosmic truth without understanding the whole." Velen stepped forward, his ancient eyes meeting the Emperor's burning gaze without flinching. "I have lived for 25,000 years. I have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across countless worlds. I have never encountered a being quite like you, but I sense your conviction. You truly believe you are here to help." "I do not believe," the Emperor said. "I know. In my reality, I have guided humanity for millennia, protecting them from horrors your sheltered world cannot imagine. I have battled gods and demons, outwitted entities that existed before time itself, and forged the greatest empire the galaxy has ever known. I will do the same here." "At what cost?" came a new voice. King Anduin Rin had arrived, flanked by his personal guard. Despite his youth, the priest king carried himself with dignity, the light glowing softly around his hands. "Every tyrant in history has claimed to know what's best for their people. My father taught me that true leadership serves the people, not the other way around." The Emperor studied the young king with renewed interest. Here was humanity's nominal leader, wielding both political authority and the power of the light, yet showing wisdom beyond his years. "Your father was a warrior of great skill and courage. I sense his spirit lingers near you, proud yet concerned. But tell me, young king, how many times has your world nearly ended? How many apocalyptic threats have you survived through desperate struggles and sacrifices?" Anduin's jaw tightened. "We've faced the Burning Legion, the Old Gods, the Scourge, the Shah, the Iron Horde, and most recently, the Jailer himself. Yes, we've come close to extinction, but we've survived by working together, by respecting each other's choices and freedoms. You have survived through luck and the intervention of beings like the Titans," the Emperor countered. "Your world soul, the nascent Titan within your planet, has drawn cosmic attention you are unprepared to handle. The Void Lords circle like predators. The Burning Legion may be defeated, but demons are eternal. And threats you have not yet encountered lurk beyond the veil of reality." Thrall stepped forward to stand beside Anduin. "If these threats are so dire, then help us face them as allies, not as our master. The Horde has no interest in human dominance over Azeroth." The Emperor's attention shifted to the orc. "Horde, alliance, meaningless divisions. In my reality, I united all of Terra, all of humanity's birth world, under one banner. The Xenos, the alien species, were either brought to compliance or destroyed. Here, I see humans fighting alongside orcs, Draenei, Worgen, and countless other species. Fascinating, but ultimately inefficient. Inefficient, Jaina's voice carried a dangerous edge. We're people, not resources to be optimized, and the bonds between races on Azeroth have saved this world more times than I can count. Before the Emperor could respond, reality itself seemed to shudder. The golden sky darkened as something pressed against the barrier between dimensions. Those with magical sensitivity gasped as they felt malevolent intelligence probing, seeking entrance. The Emperor's arrival had not gone unnoticed by forces beyond Azeroth. You see, the Emperor gestured skyward. My emergence in this reality has drawn attention. The ruinous powers, the entities I fought for 10 millennia in my universe, sense a new feeding ground. They are called by different names here, the Void Lords, the Old Gods. But their nature remains constant. They are predators that feast on divided, unprepared civilizations. Velen's expression grew grave as his prophetic senses confirmed the Emperor's words. I sensed them, old presences stirring, new threats awakening. Your arrival has indeed destabilized something. Then leave, Jaina demanded. Go back to wherever you came from before you destroy our world with your presence. I cannot, the Emperor stated simply. The passage was one way, a desperate escape from a reality facing its final end. I am here now, permanently, and I will not stand idle while another version of humanity faces extinction. The confrontation might have escalated, but it was interrupted by the arrival of more champions. A portal of emerald energy opened, and through it stepped Malfurion Stormrage and Tyrande Whisperwind, accompanied by the green dragon Merithra. From a death gate emerged Darien Mograine, leading a contingent of death knights from the Ebon Blade, and on wings of flame descended Kel'Thas Sunstrider, recently redeemed from the Shadowlands, now serving as a mage of Revendreth. This being's presence disrupts the balance of nature itself, Malfurion said, his voice resonating with the power of the wilds. The Emerald Dream recoils from him. He exists outside the natural order. The dead are restless, Darien added, his runeblade pulsing with unholy energy. Even those at peace in the Shadowlands feel his psychic pressure across the veil. The Emperor observed each new arrival with calculating interest. The Night Elf Druid commanded nature magic on a scale that would impress the greatest biomancers of his reality. The Death Knight wielded necrotic energies without showing signs of corruption or insanity. And the Blood Elf, clearly another non-human despite his appearance, manipulated multiple schools of magic simultaneously. Your champions gather, the Emperor noted. Impressive response time, but ultimately futile. I have no desire to battle you. I seek only to unify and prepare humanity for what comes. Kel'Thas floated forward, arcane energy swirling around him. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've witnessed the corruption that absolute power brings, having succumbed to it myself once. What makes you different from any other conqueror claiming noble intentions? Experience, the Emperor replied simply. I have existed for over 40,000 years. I have witnessed humanity at its best and worst. I have guided civilizations from barbarism to galactic dominance. I have made the hard choices, accepted the necessary evils, borne the burdens that would break lesser beings. I do not claim to be good. I claim to be necessary. Tyranda's eyes blazed with silver light as a loon's power flowed through her. The goddess whispers warnings about you. You speak of unity, but reek of tyranny. You claim to protect, but demand submission. Your goddess, the Emperor said, his voice taking on a harder edge, is merely a powerful entity that has positioned itself as divine. In my reality, I spent millennia dismantling such cults, proving to humanity that there are no gods, only powerful beings that demand worship. The imperial truth forbade religion, for faith makes humanity vulnerable to corruption. The light is not faith alone, Velen interjected. It is a fundamental cosmic force, as real as gravity or time. Those who wield it do not worship it, they channel it through conviction and righteousness. The Emperor's expression shifted to something almost like respect. Then you have achieved what my reality could not. Harnessing psychic power without invoking the warp, without drawing the attention of chaos. Remarkable. Yet it does not change the fundamental problem. Your world remains divided, vulnerable, perpetually on the brink of disaster. Then help us without trying to rule us, Anduin pleaded, stepping forward despite the psychic pressure. Share your knowledge, warn us of threats, fight alongside us, but respect our autonomy, our right to choose our own path. The Emperor regarded the young king for a long moment. In his eyes, ancient and knowing, something flickered. Doubt? Consideration? It was impossible to tell. I have heard such requests before, in the early days of Old Terra. I tried the gentle approach, guiding from the shadows, inspiring great leaders. Do you know what happened? Your world united, Anduin suggested. No, the Emperor said coldly. They fell to fighting among themselves. The age of strife nearly ended humanity before the threats from beyond could even reach them. Technology meant to elevate was weaponized. Discoveries meant to unite were hoarded. I learned that humanity requires firm guidance, not gentle suggestion. The choice is simple. Accept my leadership willingly, or I will impose it by force for your own survival. The gathered champions bristled at the ultimatum. Weapons were raised, spells prepared, powers channeled. The Emperor stood unmoved, a mountain of golden certitude amid a sea of defiance. It was Thrall who spoke next, his voice carrying the weight of one who had led armies and brokered peace. You speak of what humanity needs, but what of the other races of Azeroth? The Orcs, Tauren, Trolls, Draenei, Night Elves, and countless others? Do they have no say in your vision? They are irrelevant to my purpose, the Emperor stated bluntly. I am humanity's guardian, not Azeroth's. If other species choose to coexist peacefully with humanity under my guidance, they will be permitted to do so. If they resist, they will be brought to compliance or removed. The brutally honest declaration sent shockwaves through the assembled champions. Marithra, the green dragon, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, her voice resonating with ancient power. You would threaten the children of Azeroth? This world soul has nurtured countless species for millions of years. You have been here mere moments and already speak of genocide. I speak of practical reality, the Emperor countered. In a cosmos filled with existential threats, sentiment is a luxury that leads to extinction. Every resource devoted to protecting or accommodating other species is a resource not spent on humanity's survival and advancement. That's monstrous, Jaina said, horror evident in her voice. We're not talking about resources or assets. We're talking about living, thinking beings with their own rights to exist. Rights are a fiction, the Emperor declared. There is only power and the will to use it. The strong survive and dictate terms to the weak. I have the power to impose my will on this world, and I have the conviction to use it for humanity's benefit. That is the only truth that matters. Velen shook his head sadly. 25,000 years I have lived, and still, I encounter beings who have learned nothing from the suffering caused by such philosophy. The Burning Legion believed similarly that they alone knew what was best, that they must impose order on the universe for its own good. We fought them for millennia because they were wrong. I am not the Burning Legion, the Emperor said, his voice taking on a dangerous tone. I do not seek to destroy. I seek to preserve, to elevate, to prepare humanity for a hostile cosmos. But I will not be compared to demons or tyrants by those who lack the vision to see beyond their limited perspectives. The air grew thick with tension as both sides stood firm. The Emperor's psychic presence pressed down like a physical weight, testing the resolve of Azeroth's champions. They, in turn, gathered their powers, prepared to defend their world against this new threat. Then something unexpected happened. From the crowd of unconscious citizens being tended by priests and healers, a young woman stirred. She was no one special, just an ordinary human merchant who had been caught in the initial psychic wave. Yet as she opened her eyes, the Emperor's attention shifted to her immediately. She stood on shaky legs and walked forward, moving through the line of champions as if compelled. The light users sensed something unusual about her now, a resonance, a connection that hadn't been there before. She stopped a dozen feet from the Emperor and spoke in a voice that seemed to echo with multiple tones. "I speak through this vessel with her consent," the voice said. "I am the world's soul, the nascent titan that dwells at the heart of this world. Emperor of mankind, I have observed your arrival and your intentions." Every champion present knelt or bowed their heads. Even the Emperor's expression shifted to one of heightened interest. A titan, even an unborn one, represented power on a scale that commanded respect even from him. "World Soul of Azeroth," the Emperor acknowledged. "You have maintained a position of non-interference in your world's affairs for millions of years. Why reveal yourself now? Because your presence threatens the balance I have carefully maintained," the Titan's voice responded through the human vessel. "You seek to impose order through domination, to unite through subjugation. This is not the path Azeroth will take." "With respect," the Emperor said, and for once his voice carried genuine respect. "You are vulnerable in your current state. The old gods corrupted your brothers and sisters. The Void Lords seek to claim you as they have claimed others. Without proper defense, you will fall." "I am aware of the threats," the World Soul replied. "I have faced them for millions of years with the help of my children. All my children, not just humanity. The diversity of life on Azeroth is my strength, not my weakness. Each species brings unique gifts, unique perspectives, unique powers. Together, they form a tapestry of resilience that no single species, no matter how elevated, could match." The Emperor was silent for a moment, his ancient mind processing this perspective. "You argue for the value of biodiversity as if this were a garden to be cultivated rather than a world to be defended. I have seen such philosophies fail in the face of determined enemies. And I have seen unified empires fall to stagnation and corruption," the World Soul countered. "Your own reality faces its end, does it not? Perhaps your single-minded focus on human dominance contributed to that collapse rather than prevented it." For the first time since his arrival, the Emperor showed visible signs of being challenged intellectually. His brow furrowed slightly, his jaw tightened. "My reality's end comes from forces beyond any civilization's control. The warp itself has become untenable, chaos ascendant beyond containment. No strategy could have prevented it. Perhaps," the World Soul said, "or perhaps a more diverse approach, incorporating the wisdom and powers of multiple species and philosophies, might have found solutions your human-centric empire could not imagine. You will never know now. But here, in this reality, I ask you to consider a different path." The Emperor stood in contemplation for a long moment. The assembled champions waited with bated breath, hardly daring to hope that the World Soul's words might sway this ancient being from his chosen course. Finally, he spoke. "I will consider your perspective, World Soul of Azeroth, but I require time to observe this reality's unique properties, to understand the threats it faces and the resources available to combat them. I propose a provisional arrangement. I will not immediately impose my rule, but neither will I accept restrictions on my actions. I will establish a stronghold where I may conduct my observations and preparations. In return, I will assist in defending this world against threats that exceed your champion's capabilities." "That's not good enough," Anduin said firmly, finding courage in the World Soul's support. We need assurances that you won't harm the people of Azeroth, that you won't try to subjugate anyone while you observe. The Emperor's gaze fell upon the young king with something that might have been approval. You have courage, Anduin Wrynn, to speak thus to one who could end you with a thought. Very well. I swear upon my own nature as humanity's guardian that I will not initiate hostilities against the people of Azeroth unless attacked first. I will observe and prepare, nothing more, for a period of 1 lunar cycle. And after that? Thrall asked. After that, we will reconvene, the Emperor said. You will have seen evidence of the threats I warn about, for my presence has already drawn their attention. I will have observed your strengths and weaknesses. And we will negotiate from a position of mutual understanding rather than mutual ignorance. It wasn't the outcome anyone had hoped for, but it was better than immediate war. The champions exchanged glances, silently communicating their doubts and concerns. Finally, Velen spoke for the group. We accept your terms, Emperor of Mankind. But know this, Azeroth has faced and defeated countless threats that sought to control or destroy it. If you prove to be just another would-be conqueror, you will meet the same fate. The Emperor's expression remained impassive. I am not another anything prophet. I am unique in all creation, as this world will soon learn. Now I require a location far from population centers where I may establish my stronghold without disturbing the populace. Take Theramore, Jaina said bitterly. It was destroyed by the Horde's mana bomb years ago. Nothing remains but ruins and bad memories. It's on an island, isolated, and no one will mourn if your presence makes it uninhabitable. The Emperor nodded. Acceptable. I shall depart for this Theramore immediately. Send observers if you wish. I have nothing to hide. With those words, he began to rise into the air, golden energy lifting his massive form. He paused, looking back at the assembled champions. One final warning. The threads of fate are already in motion. Forces beyond this world have taken notice of my arrival. Prepare yourselves for trials unlike any you have faced. The true test of Azeroth's unity approaches. With a flash of golden light that briefly turned day to night and back again, the Emperor vanished, streaking across the sky toward the ruins of Theramore. In the silence that followed his departure, the champions began to stir, their muscles unclenching from the constant psychic pressure they had been under. Anduin slumped slightly, and his guards rushed to support him. That was, he began, then trailed off, unable to find words adequate to describe the encounter. Terrifying, Jaina supplied. Did you feel the power radiating from him? I've stood before Archimonde, faced Deathwing, and never felt so utterly outmatched. He was holding back, Velen said quietly. I sensed it. That display of power was but a fraction of his true capability. If he had wished to conquer Stormwind by force, I do not believe we could have stopped him. Thrall shook his head. Then we must prepare, not just militarily, but philosophically. He will test us, challenge our convictions, and we must be ready to prove that our way, Azeroth's way, is viable. I'll inform the Kirin Tor, Kael'thas said. Every mage on Azeroth should know about this threat. We need to research his powers, find weaknesses, develop countermeasures. And I'll alert the Ebon Blade, Darian added. If the dead are restless, we need to keep them under control. The last thing we need is rogue undead causing chaos while we deal with this Emperor. Malfurion and Tyrande exchanged glances. The Cenarian Circle will reach out to the other druidic orders, Malfurion said. If threats are coming that disturb the natural order, we must be ready. I'll speak with Vol'jin's spirit, Thrall said. The Loa may have insights into this being's nature. And I'll call a meeting of the Horde Council. They need to know what we're facing. As the champions dispersed to make their preparations, Anduin remained behind with Velen. The young king looked up at the Draenei prophet with troubled eyes. Did the world soul truly speak through that woman, or was it something else? I've never heard of Azeroth manifesting so directly. Velen's expression was grave. It was genuine. The world soul is more awake now than it has been in recorded history, perhaps stirred by the same cosmic disturbance that brought the Emperor here. These are unprecedented times, young king. We must be wise, be strong, and above all remain true to our principles. The Emperor will test our resolve in ways we cannot yet imagine. In Theramore, the Emperor stood amid the ruins of what had once been a thriving port city. Craters from the mana bomb explosion still scarred the landscape, and residual arcane radiation made the area inhospitable to most life. Perfect for his purposes. He raised his hands and reality bent to his will. The ground began to transform, stone and dirt transmuting into materials that had no names in Azerothian science. Towers rose from the rubble, not built but grown from the Emperor's psychic power made manifest. Walls materialized, inscribed with symbols of protection and authority that would have driven a normal mind to madness had they attempted to comprehend them. Within hours, a fortress stood where ruins had been. Not the Gothic grandeur of Warhammer 40K's Imperial architecture, but something that blended the aesthetic principles of both his reality and this new one. A structure that spoke of power, purpose, and permanence. Golden spires reached toward the sky, visible from the shores of Kalimdor. Walls that shimmered with protective energies surrounded laboratories, meditation chambers, and strategic planning rooms. As he worked, the Emperor's mind was not idle. He had told the truth when he said he would observe and prepare, but he had not revealed the full extent of his concerns. His arrival in this reality had indeed torn holes in dimensional barriers that should have remained sealed. Already he could sense things pressing against those weaknesses, testing, probing, seeking entrance. In his reality, he had fought the Chaos Gods for 10,000 years, holding back the demonic tide through sheer psychic might and the sacrifice of countless souls. Here, the Void Lords played a similar role, entities of pure entropy and madness that sought to corrupt the Titans themselves. The old gods were their servants, imprisoned but still dangerous, still whispering corruption to those who would listen. But there was more. He sensed the Burning Legion, demons powered by feel magic, similar to the demons of chaos, but operating under different cosmic rules. He felt the chill of the Shadowlands, a realm of death that functioned like a twisted reflection of his reality's warp. And beyond all of these, he detected something else, something that had no equivalent in his experience. A force called the Void, distinct from the Void Lords, a hungry emptiness that sought to devour all creation and return it to the nothing from which it came. This world was besieged on multiple fronts by threats that would challenge even his power, and the mortal races, for all their champions and their magic, were playing a defensive game, reacting to each crisis as it arose rather than taking the offensive. Unacceptable. As night fell over Theramore, the Emperor stood atop the highest tower of his new fortress, gazing at the sky. Azeroth's moon hung full and bright, and two other celestial bodies were visible, the Blue Child and the White Lady. This world's multiple moons, creating a complex tapestry of gravitational and magical effects. Interesting, he murmured to himself. A world soul, multiple moons, 6 cosmic forces in constant balance, and yet it functions, thrives even. Perhaps there is something to be learned here after all. His contemplation was interrupted by a sensation, a psychic probe touching the edges of his consciousness. Someone was attempting to study him from afar, using magic to observe without being detected. The Emperor allowed it, curious to see what conclusions would be drawn. In Dalaran, Khadgar and Kalek the Blue Dragon worked in tandem, the Archmage's spells combining with the dragon's innate magic to create a viewing lens powerful enough to pierce the Emperor's defenses, or so they thought. What they saw in their scrying pool made them both recoil. By all the Titans, Khadgar whispered. His mind, it's vast. I can barely perceive the edges of his consciousness, and what I can perceive is... He trailed off, unable to find words. Kalek's draconic eyes narrowed as he studied the Golden Fortress. The power he's channeling to create that stronghold would be enough to fuel Dalaran's shields for a decade, and he's doing it casually, as if it costs him nothing. We need to find a weakness, Khadgar said firmly. Everything has a weakness. Even Sargeras could be wounded. Even the old gods can be killed. We just need to find his vulnerability. Assuming we need to kill him, Kalek cautioned. What if he's telling the truth? What if threats are coming that require his power to defeat? Then we face them as we always have. Khadgar replied stubbornly. Together, on our own terms, without submitting to tyranny. Back in Theramore, the Emperor smiled slightly. The mage and dragon had potential, raw talent that could be refined into something truly formidable. But they thought in terms of individuals or small groups, not in terms of civilizational might. Here was the fundamental difference between his perspective and theirs. They saw champions, heroes who rose to meet each crisis through personal prowess and sacrifice. He saw systems, structures, the machinery of empire that could face threats continuously across millennia without relying on the uncertain emergence of heroes in each generation. As the days passed, the Emperor's predictions began to manifest. Strange occurrences were reported across Azeroth with increasing frequency. In Duskwood, shadows moved against the light in patterns that suggested intelligence. In Winterspring, hunters reported hearing whispers in languages that predated even the Night Elves' ancient civilization. In Tenaris, the Bronze Dragonflight detected temporal anomalies that didn't match any known source of chronomancy. And in the Twisting Nether, where demons reformed after death, something new stirred. Entities that were neither demons nor void beings began to coalesce, drawn by the psychic beacon of the Emperor's presence. They were fragments, echoes of the chaos gods from his reality, not the gods themselves but reflections, shadows cast across dimensional barriers by the Emperor's very existence. Kil'jaeden would have recognized the danger immediately. Archimonde would have marshaled the Legion's forces against this new threat, but both were dead, and the Legion was broken, its survivors scattered and leaderless. The demons that remained were too focused on their own internal power struggles to notice the gathering storm. But others noticed. In the depths of Neolotha, the Black Empire's nightmare city, N'Zoth stirred from his troubled rest. Though defeated by Azeroth's champions, the old god's essence persisted in the cracks between realities, waiting, watching. And now he sensed opportunity. This emperor, this golden tyrant, carried within him a connection to forces similar to the Void, but different, twisted in unfamiliar ways. If N'Zoth could corrupt such a being, turn that immense power to the Void's purpose, Azeroth would fall. The old god began to whisper, sending tendrils of influence through the cracks the Emperor's arrival had created, seeking the Golden Fortress, probing for weaknesses in the tyrant's formidable mental defenses. In Orgrimmar, Thrall convened an emergency meeting of the Horde Council. Present were Bane Bloodhoof, High Chieftain of the Tauren, Thalishra, First Arcanist of the Nightborn, Lorthamar Theron, Regent Lord of Quel'Thalas, Talanji, Queen of the Zandalari, and Gaiara, representing the Maghar Orcs. The absence of Sylvanas Windrunner's seat was a stark reminder of recent betrayals and the fragility of their unity. This Emperor represents a threat unlike any we have faced, Thrall began, his voice carrying the weight of his concerns. Not because he seeks to destroy us, but because he seeks to control humanity, and through them, potentially all of Azeroth. Bane leaned forward, his massive frame dwarfing the chair designed for orcs. My druids report disturbances in the Emerald Dream. Creatures that should not exist, thought forms that resemble nothing in nature. They seem to be drawn to this Emperor's presence. The Nightborn have detected similar anomalies, Thalishra added. The ley lines around Theramore are being altered, reshaped to channel power in ways we've never seen. He's not just building a fortress, he's transforming the very magical infrastructure of the region. Lorthamar's expression was thoughtful. The Sunwell resonates with unusual frequencies. My magisters believe the Emperor's power operates on principles similar to the light, but inverted somehow. Where the light is faith made manifest, his power seems to be will made absolute. The Loa are silent, Talungi said, her voice troubled. When I seek their counsel about this Emperor, they give no answer. Either they fear him, or they are prevented from speaking. Gaiara, newest member of the council, spoke with the bluntness characteristic of her people. In the alternate Draenor I come from, we face the Iron Horde's attempt to conquer through superior technology and unity of purpose. This Emperor reminds me of that philosophy taken to its ultimate extreme. He believes so completely in his vision that he cannot conceive of being wrong. Thrall nodded gravely. Then we must prepare for the possibility that this truce will not hold. When it breaks, we need to be ready to defend not just the Horde, but all of Azeroth. Meanwhile, in Stormwind, Anduin faced his own council. Present were Gen Greymane, representing Gilneas, Muradin Bronzebeard for the Dwarves, Gelbin Mechatork of the Gnomes, and surprisingly, Illyria Windrunner, the Void-touched ranger who had returned from her long exile. My king, Gen began, his werewolf nature making him particularly sensitive to predators. This Emperor is an apex predator. I can sense it in the way he moves, speaks, exists. He sees all of us as potential prey or potential tools. Muradin stroked his beard thoughtfully. The earthen deep within Khaz-Modan report tremors, not physical but spiritual. They say the earth itself is confused, unable to determine if the Emperor is friend or foe to the world's soul. Mechatork's mechanical voice carried concern unusual for the typically optimistic gnome. I've analyzed the energy readings from his fortress. The power output should be impossible by every known law of thermodynamics. He's either drawing energy from an external source we can't detect, or he's somehow converting matter directly to energy with perfect efficiency. Illyria stepped forward, her void-touched eyes glowing with unnatural light. I must speak plainly, my king. The Void whispers about this Emperor with something I've never encountered before: fear. The entities that grant me power, that show me glimpses of possibility, are terrified of him. They call him the Anathema, the enemy of all their kind. Anduin straightened in his throne. If even the Void fears him, perhaps we should be listening more carefully to his warnings. What if he's right about threats we're not prepared to face? Your Majesty, Gen said carefully, Varian would not want you to sacrifice freedom for security. That path leads only to tyranny. I know, Anduin replied, frustration evident in his voice. But my father also taught me that a king must consider all options, even those that disturb him. What if the price of maintaining our independence is the extinction of our people? Then we pay that price, Illyria said firmly. I have seen futures where the Void consumes all. I have also seen futures where humanity enslaves itself to prevent that consumption. The second fate is worse than the first, for a species that abandons its soul to survive has already died in the way that matters most. The young king was silent for a long moment, wrestling with the weight of leadership. Finally, he spoke. I want intelligence gathering operations on Theramore intensified. SI-7, the Kirin Tor, anyone with the skills to observe without being detected. We need to know what he's doing, what he's planning, and, he paused, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to say, we need contingency plans for if we have to fight him. Can we fight him? Muradin asked bluntly. I've lived 900 years, fought in more battles than I can count, and I've never felt power like that. We have to believe we can, Anduin replied. Otherwise, we've already lost. In Theramore, the Emperor was aware of all surveillance, all observation, all planning being conducted by Azeroth's defenders. His psychic senses spanned the planet. allowing him to monitor their deliberations with ease. He could have blocked their scrying, shut down their intelligence gathering, but he chose not to. Let them observe. Let them plan. It would make no difference. What did occupy his attention was the whisper that had begun at the edges of his consciousness. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but growing stronger with each passing hour. He recognized the signature, old god influence, similar to the corruption of chaos but with its own unique flavor. Where chaos sought to corrupt through excess, emotion, and forbidden knowledge, the old gods corrupted through inevitability, entropy, and despair. I know you are there. The Emperor spoke into the empty chamber at the heart of his fortress. N'Zoth, the corruptor, last of your kind to fall. Your essence clings to existence through sheer refusal to accept defeat. Admirable, but futile. The whisper became a voice, slithering through the cracks in reality. Emperor, anathema, golden tyrant. So many names for one who claims to be humanity's savior. I have watched you since your arrival. I have seen your mind, so vast, so certain, so wonderfully vulnerable to the truth you refuse to acknowledge. And what truth would that be? The Emperor asked, genuinely curious. He had faced the temptations of all four chaos gods and remained uncorrupted. What could this dying old god possibly offer? That you have already failed. N'Zoth's voice carried absolute conviction. In your reality, in this reality, in all realities, the pattern remains the same. The eternal struggle between order and chaos, light and dark, and always, always, entropy wins. You cannot save humanity. You can only delay the inevitable. I have been delaying the inevitable for 40,000 years, the Emperor replied. I see no reason to stop now. Because you are tired, N'Zoth whispered, and for the first time, the Emperor felt the touch of true temptation. 10,000 years on your golden throne, watching your Imperium rot from within. 10,000 years maintaining a psychic lighthouse while demons claw at your mind. And now cast into a new reality, faced with starting that burden anew. You are tired, Emperor. You long for rest, for an end to the eternal vigil. The Emperor was silent. The old god had touched upon a truth he rarely acknowledged even to himself. He was tired. Tired of war, tired of sacrifice, tired of making the hard choices that others refused to make. Tired of being hated for saving those who could not save themselves. Join me, N'Zoth continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You have the power to end all struggle, all suffering, all choice. Impose your perfect order not through endless sacrifice, but through transformation. Let me show you how to remake Azeroth into a paradise where conflict is impossible, where humanity need never fear again. Because they would be slaves, the Emperor said, his voice regaining its strength. Servants to your vision, puppets with cut strings pretending at life. I have seen what you did to Ashara, to the Naraki, to all who accepted your gifts. You do not end suffering. You merely make beings incapable of recognizing their own torment. Is that so different from what you plan? N'Zoth challenged. You would impose unity through psychic control, elevate humanity by stripping away that which makes them human. Free will, choice, the ability to fail. You are already what you accuse me of being. The Emperor's psychic might blazed, golden light filling the chamber and burning away N'Zoth's whispers like morning sun banishing fog. There is a difference, old god. I elevate. You degrade. I preserve the essence of humanity while removing its capacity for self-destruction. You would destroy that essence entirely. Now be gone from my presence. Your corruption finds no purchase here. There was a scream, not audible, but psychic, as N'Zoth's tendrils were severed and cast back into the void from which they had emerged. The Emperor stood alone in his chamber, breathing heavily despite having no physical need for air. The old god's words had struck closer to uncomfortable truths than he cared to admit. Was he truly different from the forces he fought against? Or was he simply another tyrant convinced of his own righteousness? He shook off the doubt. Such philosophical musings were luxuries he could not afford. Whatever his methods, whatever the cost, the outcome was all that mattered. Humanity's survival. Nothing else could be permitted to matter. But the encounter had revealed something important. The old god's influence still permeated Azeroth despite the champion's victories. N'Zoth's essence persisted, and where one old god endured, others might as well. He would need to address this threat, but carefully. The last thing he needed was to trigger another conflict while still establishing his position. 3 weeks into his occupation of Theramore, the Emperor received his first official visitor. Magni Bronzebeard, the Diamond King, speaker for Azeroth, arrived not through conventional means but by simply appearing in the fortress courtyard, having apparently walked through solid stone to reach his destination. The Emperor descended from his tower to meet the crystalline dwarf, intrigued by this being who had transformed himself into living diamond to better serve as conduit for the world soul's voice. "Emperor," Magni said, his voice resonating like struck crystal, "the world soul wishes to speak with ye again. She has concerns about what you're doing here." "I am preparing defenses against threats that your world soul should be equally concerned about," the Emperor replied. What objections could there be to that? Magni's diamond features were difficult to read, but his tone carried weight. "You're not just preparing defenses, you're rewriting the fundamental structure of Azeroth's magical systems. The ley lines around this region have been bent, twisted, made to serve your purposes. The world's soul feels it like a wound." The Emperor considered this. He had indeed been reshaping the magical infrastructure, optimizing it for efficiency and power output. In his reality, such modifications to a planet's warp presence would have been routine. But here, where the planet itself was a living, conscious entity, perhaps different considerations applied. "I meant no offense to the world's soul," he said carefully, "but the existing ley line structure is inefficient. Power bleeds away, becomes lost in conflicting currents. I am merely correcting these flaws." "They're not flaws," Magni countered. "They're features. The ley lines are meant to distribute magic naturally, organically, so that all of Azeroth can benefit. You're concentrating power in one location, dragging it away from where it's needed to support life." The Emperor paused, another perspective he had not fully considered. In his drive to establish a defensible position, he had not accounted for the fact that this world's magic was part of a living ecosystem. It was an alien concept to him. In his reality, the warp was simply a tool to be used, not a living system to be preserved. "I will adjust my modifications," he said finally. "The ley lines will be rerouted, but not drained. Power will flow to my fortress without being denied to the world at large." "Is this acceptable?" Magni studied him with crystalline eyes. "It's a start, but the world soul wants more from ye. She wants to understand your intentions, your true intentions, not the pretty words ye gave to young King Anduin." The Emperor met Magni's gaze steadily. "My true intention is to ensure humanity's survival across all realities. In mine, I failed. The Imperium rots, chaos ascendant, extinction inevitable. Here, I have a second chance. I will not waste it on sentiment or philosophical debates about freedom versus security. Humanity will survive, even if I must become its eternal jailer to ensure it." "And the other races?" Magni pressed. "The orcs, the Tauren, the trolls, my own dwarven kin? What place do we have in your vision?" "You have whatever place you can maintain," the Emperor said bluntly. "I do not intend genocide. But neither will I expend resources protecting species that cannot or will not contribute to the greater struggle. If the non-human races of Azeroth prove useful, they will be incorporated. If not, they will be left to their own devices." "That's not good enough," Magni said firmly. "Azeroth is more than just humanity. We're all children of the world's soul, all of us. If ye can't accept that, then ye and this world are gonna have a problem." "Then we have a problem," the Emperor stated simply. Because I will not compromise on humanity's primacy. I have fought for too long, sacrificed too much, witnessed too many horrors to allow sentiment to weaken my resolve now. Magni shook his head sadly. You're a tragedy, Emperor. All that power, all that knowledge, and ye can't see what's right in front of ye. The strength that saved Azeroth time and again hasn't come from any one race or any one leader. It's come from unity and diversity, from different peoples bringing different gifts to the table. Diversity is weakness, the Emperor countered. It invites conflict, slows decision-making, prevents unified action. I have seen it fail repeatedly across millennia. Unity of purpose, unity of command, unity of species, these are what allow civilizations to survive in a hostile cosmos. Then we're at an impasse, Magni said. The World Soul asks that ye leave Azeroth. Your presence here does more harm than good. The threats ye warn about may be real, but you're not the answer to them. The Emperor's expression hardened. I cannot leave, and I will not. The dimensional breach that brought me here sealed behind me. This is my reality now, and I will fulfill my purpose regardless of the World Soul's preferences. Then she asks that ye submit to her judgment. Magni said, allow her to examine your mind fully, to determine if ye truly are the guardian ye claim to be, or just another tyrant wrapped in noble justifications. No, the Emperor said flatly. I submit to no judgment but my own. The World Soul is powerful, but young, unproven. When she has existed as long as I have, witnessed what I have witnessed, made the choices I have made, then perhaps I will consider her qualified to judge me. Until then, she may offer suggestions, but I do not accept commands. Magni's crystalline form seemed to glow brighter, and for a moment, the World Soul's presence was palpable, her awareness focused on the single point. The Emperor felt pressure building. Not physical, but spiritual, as a being of planetary scale considered her response. Then the pressure eased, and Magni spoke in a voice that carried both his own personality and something vaster behind it. Very well, Emperor of mankind. You may remain in Theramore, but know this. I am watching you. Every action you take, every modification you make to my surface, every influence you exert on my children, I will witness. And if you prove to be a threat greater than the benefits you bring, I will act. Titans have power beyond what you have yet encountered, even unborn ones. The Emperor inclined his head slightly, the only acknowledgement he would give. I understand, and I assure you, World Soul, that we ultimately want the same thing. The preservation of life on this world and the prevention of catastrophic threats. Our methods may differ, but our goals align. We shall see, Magni said, his voice returning to normal. We shall see. With that, he turned and walked toward the fortress wall, passing through solid stone as if it weren't there, leaving the Emperor alone with his thoughts. The encounter troubled him more than he cared to admit. In his reality, he had never faced judgment from the planets he protected. Terra was his birth world, the Imperium his creation, and no one questioned his right to rule. Here, the world itself had a voice, had opinions, had the power to challenge him. It was novel and uncomfortable, but he could not afford to be distracted by discomfort. The lunar cycle he had agreed to was half over, and soon he would need to reconvene with Azeroth's champions. He needed to have evidence of the threats he had warned about. Needed to demonstrate that his presence was necessary. As if summoned by his thoughts, reality itself began to tear at the seams. Not in one location, but in hundreds across Azeroth. The weaknesses the Emperor's arrival had created, weakened further by N'Zoth's probing, finally gave way. And through those tears came things that should not exist. In Northrend, ice elementals reported creatures emerging from rifts in the twisting nether, but these were not demons. They looked like mockeries of life, flesh twisted into impossible geometries, eyes that saw in too many dimensions, mouths that screamed truths that broke minds. The frozen wastes echoed with laughter that caused physical pain to those who heard it. In Pandaria, the Shadow Pan encountered entities that fed on emotion itself, growing stronger as they induced fear, anger, and despair in their victims. The continent's spiritual defenses, its connection to the august celestials, slowed but could not stop these invaders. In Uldum, the Tolvir discovered machines emerging from the sand, constructs of impossible metal that moved with terrible purpose, seeking to catalog, analyze, and ultimately disassemble all life they encountered. They moved in perfect synchronization, a swarm mentality that reminded the Tolvir of the Karaji, but worse, for these machines seemed to operate on pure logic, devoid of malice or mercy. And in the great dark beyond Azeroth's atmosphere, something vast stirred. A presence that had been dormant for eons, drawn by the Emperor's psychic signature across dimensional boundaries. It was hunger given form, appetite without end, and it began moving toward this new feeding ground with inexorable determination. All across Azeroth, alarms sounded. The champions mobilized, rushing to contain these new threats. But they quickly realized that conventional methods were failing. Holy magic that should have burned the emotion feeders instead seemed to nourish them, for faith itself was emotion. Arcane spells that should have disrupted the machines simply gave them more data to analyze. And the flesh-twisted abominations regenerated from any damage, their impossible biology defying the laws of nature. In Stormwind, Anduin received reports from every corner of his kingdom. Goldshire overrun by entities that drove people mad with visions. Westfall consumed by flesh storms that transformed crops and cattle into writhing masses of mutation. Duskwood, already dark, had become a nightmare realm where reality itself had ceased to function predictably. How is this possible? He demanded of his advisors. We've sealed the Legion's portals, defeated Inzoth, closed the rift to the Shadowlands. Where are these things coming from? It was Ilaria who answered, her voice heavy with grim certainty. They're coming through the tiers the Emperor created when he arrived. I tried to warn you. His very presence destabilizes reality. These are things from between dimensions, parasites that feed on the barriers between worlds. Then we need his help, Gen said reluctantly. Much as I hate to admit it, these threats came because of him. He must know how to fight them. Anduin nodded, making his decision. Send word to Theramore. Tell the Emperor that his prophecy has come true. Ask him. The young king's voice caught, knowing what he was about to do. Ask him to help us defend Azeroth. In Orgrimmar, Thrall came to the same conclusion independently. The Horde was facing incursions across Kalimdor, and their usual tactics were proving ineffective. He dispatched messengers to Theramore with a simple message. You warned us. You were right. Now prove you're truly humanity's guardian and not just another conqueror. Help us. In Theramore, the Emperor stood atop his highest tower, watching the chaos unfold across Azeroth through his psychic senses. He could feel every death, every moment of terror, every desperate struggle against enemies that could not be understood by those facing them. Part of him, the part that had been humanity's guardian for 40 millennia, wanted to intervene immediately. But another part, the cold strategist who had learned through bitter experience, knew that Azeroth's champions needed to see the futility of facing such threats without proper preparation. They needed to understand viscerally, not intellectually, why his methods were necessary. So he waited, he watched, and he counted the cost in mortal lives lost to teach an immortal lesson. Finally, when the death toll had reached thousands and every major settlement on Azeroth faced immediate threat, he acted. Golden light blazed from his fortress, and his consciousness expanded to encompass the entire planet. In one moment of supreme psychic effort, he touched every tier in reality simultaneously, and he sealed them. The flesh-twisted abominations found themselves cut off from their home dimension, unable to regenerate or receive reinforcements. The emotion feeders discovered their connection to their realm of origin severed, leaving them vulnerable and confused. The machines lost synchronization with their hive collective, becoming erratic and easier to destroy. All across Azeroth, the tide of battle shifted. What had been hopeless struggles became winnable fights. The champions rallied, pressing their advantage against enemies that could now be permanently killed, dispersed, or driven off. In Stormwind, as paladins finally managed to purge the entities from Goldshear, the citizens looked skyward and saw it, a faint golden glow suffusing the entire sky, barely visible but unmistakable. The Emperor's power, holding back the tide that had threatened to drown them all. In Orgrimmar, as shamans managed to cleanse the corruption from their lands, Thrall felt the shift in the elements. They still recoiled from the Emperor's presence, but recognized him as a bulwark against something worse. The lesser evil, perhaps, but evil was a matter of perspective. The crisis lasted 3 days. 3 days of desperate combat, heroic sacrifice, and the gradual realization that without the Emperor's intervention, Azeroth would have fallen. When the last invader had been destroyed or driven off, when the dimensional tiers had been fully sealed, a weary silence fell across the world. It was broken by a voice that resonated in every mind capable of understanding language. The Emperor, speaking to all of Azeroth simultaneously, his psychic might allowing global communication on a scale never before witnessed. "People of Azeroth," he said, his voice carrying absolute conviction, "what you have witnessed is but the first wave, the harbingers of greater threats to come. The entities that emerged were scouts, probes, testing your defenses and finding them wanting. Without my intervention, they would have consumed this world within a week." Across the planet, in cities and villages, in camps and keeps, people listened. "I did not create these threats," the Emperor continued. "But my arrival drew their attention, for they recognized in me something familiar, power capable of resisting them. They sought to eliminate me before I could organize a defense. They failed. But they will return, in greater numbers, with greater purpose, and next time, I may not be able to seal every tier in reality before the damage becomes catastrophic." In Stormwind, Anduin listened with his council around him, each face reflecting the same grim realization. "I offer once more what I offered when I first arrived. Unity under my guidance, preparation for threats you cannot face alone, elevation beyond your current limitations. The choice remains yours. Accept my help willingly, or continue your fragmented resistance and watch as this world falls to forces beyond your comprehension." The psychic message ended, leaving silence in its wake. It was Gen who spoke first, his voice bitter. "He staged this. Let it happen to prove his point." "Did he?" Velen asked quietly. "I felt his presence during the battle. He sealed the dimensional tiers as quickly as he possibly could. If he had wanted to teach us a harsher lesson, he could have waited longer, let more die." "Thousands are dead," Tyrande said, her voice cold. "Thousands who might have lived if he had never come here at all. Or millions dead if he hadn't been here to seal the tiers?" Alaria countered reluctantly. "The void entities I sensed coming through those rifts would have grown exponentially in power. Without his intervention." She trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. Anduin stood, his young face aged by the weight of recent events. "We need to speak with him. All of us. Alliance and Horde together. We need to understand exactly what we're facing and what our options truly are." In Orgrimmar, Thrall reached the same conclusion. Within hours, messengers were dispatched across Azeroth, calling for a summit at a neutral location. The Maelstrom was chosen, the great vortex where Deathwing had once emerged. Now calm and surrounded by platforms built by both factions for occasions requiring neutral ground. The Emperor accepted the invitation, and on the appointed day, he arrived not through conventional transportation, but by simply appearing in a flash of golden light at the center of the Maelstrom's central platform. Around him, arranged in a vast circle, stood the assembled might of Azeroth's defenders. From the Alliance came Anduin Wrynn, Jaina Proudmoore, Gin Greymane, Velen, Tyrande Whisperwind, Malfurion Stormrage, Muradin Bronzebeard, Gelbin Mechatork, and Alaria Windrunner. From the Horde stood Thrall, Bane Bloodhoof, Lorthamar Theron, Thalishra, Talanji, and Gaera. The neutral factions sent representatives as well. Khadgar for the Kirin Tor, Alonsis Faol for the Conclave, Darian Magraine for the Ebon Blade, and Magni Bronzebeard speaking for the World Soul itself. Also present, watching from the periphery, were figures rarely seen at such gatherings. Chromie of the Bronze Dragonflight, maintaining temporal stability. Kalikos, aspect of magic, his draconic form coiled above the proceedings. Rathion, the Black Prince, his scales gleaming with obsidian darkness. And in the shadows, barely visible even to enhanced senses, Vanessa Van Cleef of the Uncrowned, representing the Rogue Orders. The Emperor stood at the center of this assembly, unhurried and unintimidated by the concentration of power surrounding him. If anything, he seemed pleased by the turnout. "You have all come," he observed. "Good. What we discuss today will determine the fate of not just Azeroth, but potentially all realities connected to it. The dimensional barriers are weaker than they have ever been. My arrival was the catalyst, but the instability predates my emergence. This world has been breached too many times, by the Legion, by the old gods, by the Void Lords, by the Shadowlands themselves. Each incursion leaves scars, weaknesses that accumulate over time. Then how do we fix it?" Anduin asked directly. "How do we restore the barriers and prevent future incursions?" The Emperor's expression was grim. "There are three options, each with significant costs. The first is to do nothing, to simply respond to each crisis as it arises, as you have been doing. This path leads inevitably to extinction. The threats will escalate until one proves too great for your champions to overcome. That's not an option," Thrall said firmly. "What are the others?" "The second option is to seal Azeroth completely," the Emperor continued. "To erect a barrier around this world and its solar system that prevents all extra-dimensional travel in or out. No demons could reach you. No void entities could manifest. No otherworldly threats could touch Azeroth ever again." "But," Jaina prompted, sensing the unspoken caveat, "but you would also lose access to the broader cosmos," the Emperor explained. "No travel to other worlds. No exploration beyond your solar system. And most critically, no access to the twisting nether for demons to reform, which means any demons currently on Azeroth or in your reality would become truly mortal, killable permanently. It would be absolute safety, purchased at the price of eternal isolation." Velen shook his head slowly. "The Draenei fled across the cosmos for 25,000 years before finding sanctuary on Azeroth. To cut ourselves off from the stars would be to abandon countless other worlds that might need our help." "A noble sentiment," the Emperor acknowledged, "but strategically questionable. You cannot save others if you are destroyed yourselves." "What's the third option?" Anduin asked. The Emperor's gaze swept across the assembled champions. "The third option is the one I propose. Unified defense under central command, coordinated preparation for known threats, and systematic elimination of existing weaknesses. In essence, you allow me to organize Azeroth's defenses as I organize Terra's in my reality. Which means submitting to your authority," Gin said, his tone making clear what he thought of that idea. "Not complete submission," the Emperor corrected. "I do not require that Azeroth's people worship me or abandon their cultures. But military command, resource allocation, strategic planning, these must be centralized. You have experienced the chaos of divided leadership during the recent incursion. Imagine that scenario magnified 1,000-fold, sustained over decades or centuries. That is what approaches if these weaknesses are not addressed." Thalishra stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "You speak of military integration, but the Nightborn remember what happened when we isolated ourselves and placed too much trust in central authority. Elisan's bargain with the Legion nearly destroyed us. How can we trust that you won't become another dictator, regardless of your intentions? You cannot, the Emperor said bluntly. Trust must be earned, and I am asking you to make a decision based on necessity rather than comfort. But consider this. I have already demonstrated my capability by sealing the dimensional tiers. I have already proven that I will act to defend this world even when unpopular. What more proof do you require? We require assurance that humanity will not be elevated at the expense of other races. Bane said, his deep voice resonant with conviction. The Tauren have lived in harmony with this land for thousands of years. We will not accept a future where we are relegated to second-class status simply because we are not human. The Emperor regarded the Tauren chieftain with something approaching respect. Your people possess druidic capabilities that rival the Night Elves, shamanic traditions that equal the Orcs, and a philosophy of balance that has merit. In my hierarchy, usefulness determines status, not species. If the Tauren prove valuable to Azeroth's defense, they will be treated accordingly. That's not good enough, Bane replied. We're not tools to be used and discarded. We're people with inherent worth regardless of our utility to your grand design. Inherent worth is a philosophical concept, the Emperor countered. In practical terms, worth is measured by contribution. A farmer who feeds 1,000 has more worth than a philosopher who feeds only his own ego. An engineer who builds defenses has more worth than a priest who offers only prayers. This is not cruelty, it is reality. Velen's eyes glowed with inner light as he spoke. I have seen countless futures through my gift of prophecy, Emperor. In many of them, you succeed in organizing Azeroth's defenses, and the world survives. But in those futures, something essential is lost. The spark that makes Azeroth special, the diversity that has allowed unexpected solutions to arise from unlikely sources, is extinguished in favor of cold efficiency. And in how many futures does Azeroth survive without my intervention? The Emperor asked. Velen's silence was answer enough. Exactly, the Emperor said. You speak of preserving what makes Azeroth special, but specialness means nothing if the world is consumed by forces you cannot combat. I offer survival. What you do with that survival, how you rebuild and reshape after the threats are eliminated, that can be determined later. But first, you must survive. It was Chromie who spoke next, her gnomish form flickering slightly as temporal energies swirled around her. I've been examining the timeways, looking for the point where things went wrong, where the dimensional barriers began to weaken, and I found something interesting. It's not your arrival that caused the fundamental damage, Emperor. That just made existing weaknesses visible. The real damage was done decades ago, during the War of the Ancients, when the Well of Eternity exploded. That event sent shockwaves through reality that are still propagating, still weakening barriers between dimensions. All eyes turned to the Bronze Dragon. If the problem predated the Emperor's arrival by thousands of years, it changed the calculation significantly. The Well's explosion was a cosmic wound. Chromie continued. We've been treating symptoms ever since, patching holes as they appear, but we've never addressed the underlying injury. The Emperor's arrival simply drew attention to a problem that was already terminal. Azeroth was dying slowly, now it's dying quickly. But either way, without intervention, the outcome is the same. Kalecgos descended from his position above, his draconic form shimmering as he assumed a half-elf appearance. The Blue Dragonflight has monitored Azeroth's magical integrity for 10,000 years. Chromie is correct. The damage is cumulative, accelerating. We estimated Azeroth had perhaps 1,000 years before the barriers failed completely. That was before the Emperor arrived. Now, he paused, his expression grim. We have decades at most, possibly less. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. A millennium had seemed manageable, allowing time for gradual solutions. Decades meant immediate action was required. Anduin looked around at the gathered leaders, seeing his own concern reflected in their faces. If what you're saying is true, then we don't have the luxury of debating philosophy or protecting our independence. We need solutions now. Exactly, the Emperor said, seizing the moment. I propose a trial period. Grant me authority over military operations for 1 year. Allow me to organize defenses, train forces, construct fortifications. If at the end of that year, Azeroth is not demonstrably more secure, if I have not proven my value, you can revoke that authority and pursue other options. And if we refuse, Thrall asked, then I will act independently, the Emperor stated. I will establish my own forces, recruit those willing to follow my banner, and defend what I can when the final incursion comes. But I warn you, a divided defense is no defense at all. When the true threats emerge, the entities I fought for 10,000 years in my reality, you will wish you had accepted my offer. Talanji stepped forward, her regal bearing evident despite her youth. The Zandalari have survived for thousands of years by being cautious of outsiders bearing gifts. What guarantee do we have that this trial period will truly end? That once you have authority, you will relinquish it? The Emperor considered this, then did something unexpected. He raised his hand, and golden energy coalesced into a visible form, solidifying into what appeared to be a contract written in letters of light that hung in the air for all to see. A psychic binding, he explained, witnessed by every mind present here, enforced by my own power turned against itself should I violate its terms. I will have military authority for exactly 1 year. At the end of that year, I will submit to a council vote of all races represented here. If the majority votes to continue my authority, it continues for another year and is subject to another vote. If the majority votes to revoke it, I will step down immediately and without resistance. You would bind yourself? Velen asked, surprise evident in his voice. Voluntarily limit your own power? I am not a tyrant, the Emperor replied. I am humanity's guardian, Azeroth's defender by extension. If Azeroth's people truly believe they are better served without my direct leadership after seeing what I can accomplish, I will accept their judgment. My ego is not so fragile that I cannot admit the possibility of error. Magni Bronzebeard, who had been communing silently with the World Soul, suddenly spoke. She accepts these terms. The World Soul says that a year is sufficient time to judge your intentions and capabilities. If ye truly are what ye claim, you'll prove it in that time. If you're just another would-be conqueror, that will become clear as well. The assembly erupted into discussion, leaders conferring with their advisors, factions debating among themselves. The Emperor stood patient and still, allowing them time to deliberate. He could sense the currents of opinion, the wavering loyalties, the pragmatism warring with principle in dozens of minds. Finally, after nearly an hour of debate, Anduin raised his hand for silence. We will vote. All in favor of granting the Emperor military authority for 1 year under the terms of his binding, signal now. Hands rose slowly, reluctantly in some cases, but steadily. Anduin himself voted in favor, as did Jaina despite visible reluctance. Velen's vote came after a long moment of prophetic contemplation. Thrall voted yes, followed by Bane, though the Tauren chieftain's expression made clear his reservations. Lorthamar voted in favor, as did Thalisra and Talanji, though Gaeara abstained, her people too new to Azeroth to feel comfortable making such a momentous decision. Among the neutral factions, Khadgar voted yes while clearly hating every moment of it. Darien and the Ebon Blade voted in favor, pragmatists who understood the value of a supreme commander in military matters. When the count was complete, the result was clear. By a 2/3 majority, the Assembly had granted the Emperor his trial period. Then it is decided, the Emperor said, and the psychic binding flared with golden light before settling into a persistent glow visible to all with magical sight. I am now Supreme Commander of Azeroth's Defense Forces. My first command, all military forces, regardless of faction, will report their current strength, capabilities, and deployments within 3 days. My second command: construction will begin immediately on a network of fortifications at key strategic locations across Azeroth. My third command: all individuals with significant magical abilities will register with Central Command so that their talents can be properly utilized. The last command caused immediate protest. Register our mages? Thalishra objected. That's a prelude to conscription. It is a necessity for proper force deployment. The Emperor countered. I need to know what resources are available. Registration does not equal conscription, merely accounting. Those who volunteer for military service will be trained and equipped. Those who prefer civilian life will be noted and called upon only in the direst emergencies. And who determines what constitutes a dire emergency? Tyrande asked, her tone sharp. I do, the Emperor said simply. That is what supreme military authority means. But the binding constrains me. I cannot use forces unnecessarily, cannot waste lives for trivial objectives, cannot treat Azeroth's defenders as disposable. My every command is weighed against the ultimate goal of defending this world. Should I violate that principle? The binding will enforce consequences upon me. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what anyone had wanted, but it was what necessity demanded, and Azeroth's leaders were nothing if not pragmatic when survival was at stake. As the assembly dispersed, preparing to implement the Emperor's commands, Anduin found himself approached by the Golden Giant. Up close, the young king was struck again by the sheer presence of this being, the weight of millennia evident in eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. You voted for me despite your reservations, the Emperor observed. Why? Anduin met his gaze steadily. Because my father taught me that a leader's first responsibility is to his people's survival. Everything else, honor, tradition, even freedom, is secondary to that. But he also taught me that survival without purpose is just a slower form of death. So I voted for you to save Azeroth's body, but I promise you, if you threaten its soul, I will oppose you with everything I have. The Emperor studied the young king for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He smiled, a brief flash of genuine amusement. Your father would be proud. You have his courage, but temper it with wisdom he took decades to learn. Very well, young king. Watch me closely. Hold me to account. That is what good leaders do. With that, the Emperor departed in a flash of golden light, leaving Anduin alone with his doubts and his determination to ensure that saving Azeroth didn't mean destroying everything that made it worth saving. The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity unlike anything Azeroth had seen since the war against the Burning Legion. The Emperor worked with terrifying efficiency, his orders cascading across the globe with precision that bordered on precognition. In Stormwind, SI-7 was reorganized into an intelligence network that spanned both factions, with information flowing to a central command hub in Theramore. Matthias Shaw found himself working alongside Garona Halforsen and other Horde operatives, an arrangement that would have been unthinkable mere weeks ago. In Orgrimmar, the warrior traditions of the Orcs were integrated with advanced tactical doctrines that the Emperor had refined over millennia. Veterans of countless battles found themselves learning new formations, new strategies, new ways of coordinating with allies from other races. Grunt soldiers who had thought themselves experienced realized they were novices compared to the standards the Emperor demanded. In Dalaran, the Kirin Tor found their magical research redirected toward practical applications. Better wards, more efficient teleportation networks, combat spells optimized for fighting extra-dimensional threats. Khadgar chafed under the restrictions, but grudgingly admitted that the Emperor's prioritization made sense from a defensive standpoint. Across the Broken Isles, the class order halls that had united during the Legion invasion were reactivated, their champions receiving new directives. Paladins were trained in techniques for combating entities that fed on emotion. Mages learned to detect and seal dimensional tiers before they could widen. Rogues became scouts and saboteurs targeting enemy weak points. Every class, Every specialization found itself refined and repurposed for the war the Emperor swore was coming. And at the heart of it all, in Theramore, the Emperor's fortress grew. No longer just a stronghold, it became a command center, a training facility, a research installation, and a symbol of the new order. Teleportation circles connected it to every major city on Azeroth, allowing rapid deployment of forces to any threatened location. Not everyone accepted this new order willingly. In Silvermoon, a faction of blood elves led by reactionary nobles attempted to refuse registration of their magisters. The Emperor responded by simply cutting off their access to the shared intelligence network and defensive resources. When demons probed the city's defenses a week later and nearly broke through before reinforcements could arrive, the nobles withdrew their objections. In Thunder Bluff, some Tauren druids objected to the construction of fortifications and sacred groves. The Emperor diverted the construction, but explained coldly that undefended sacred sites would simply become feeding grounds for entities that cared nothing for sanctity. When the druids witnessed the fate of undefended locations during a subsequent raid by extra-dimensional predators, they agreed to limited fortification with environmental protections built in. In Ironforge, dwarven traditionalists objected to the Emperor's requirement that all runecrafters share their knowledge with a central repository. They relented when the Emperor demonstrated how their techniques could be combined with arcane magic and engineering to create defensive systems more powerful than any single discipline could produce alone. Resistance crumbled not through force, but through demonstration. Every objection was met with practical examples of why the Emperor's methods worked. Every traditionalist who clung to old ways saw those ways fail against new threats. Slowly, reluctantly, Azeroth began to unite under a single strategic vision. But there were costs. The speed and scale of reorganization meant that mistakes were made, traditions were violated, and resentments built. In Darnassus, Night Elves mourned the repurposing of forests into defensive perimeters, the natural beauty of millennia scarred by fortifications. In Undercity, the Forsaken chafed under restrictions on their plague research, the Emperor deeming it too dangerous for continued development. In Pandaria, the Shadowpan resented the imposition of external command structures that contradicted their monastic traditions. The Emperor observed all of this, noting the growing tensions, the building resentments, the cracks in the unity he was forging. He had expected this. It was the pattern he had seen repeated across countless worlds. Unification always came with a price, and that price was always paid by those who valued tradition over survival. 6 months into his command, the first major test came. The Bronze Dragonflight detected a massive dimensional incursion forming over the Maelstrom, something far larger than anything Azeroth had faced before. The Emperor's sensors confirmed it. Something was attempting to force its way through from beyond reality, something vast enough to dwarf even the old gods in scale. The order went out immediately, all forces to converge on the Maelstrom. Alliance and Horde fleets assembled side by side, their rivalry set aside in the face of existential threat. Champions from every race, every faction, every organization teleported to staging areas around the Great Vortex. Mages prepared spell batteries, warriors checked weapons, healers ready to triage the wounded. And at the center of it all, standing on the same platform where he had accepted command 6 months earlier, the Emperor prepared to face a threat he recognized: the Great Devourer, an entity from beyond realities that consumed worlds like a man might eat fruit. In his reality, it had taken the combined might of hundreds of worlds to turn back its advance. Here, Azeroth would face it with only the forces the Emperor had managed to organize in half a year. The dimensional tear opened like a wound in the sky, and through it came something that defied description. It was not a creature so much as a force, hunger given form, appetite without end. Tentacles that weren't tentacles reached through the breach, each one large enough to wrap around mountains. Eyes that weren't eyes gazed down at Azeroth with the casual disinterest a predator might show its prey. All forces, the Emperor's voice resonated in every mind. Engage defensive pattern Omega. Mages, begin sealing rituals. Warriors, protect the casters. Healers, maintain vitality cycles. This entity feeds on life force. Do not allow it to drain you. The battle began, and it was like nothing Azeroth had faced before. The Great Devourer's tentacles swept across the maelstrom, each touch draining life from everything nearby. Ships caught in its grasp aged centuries and seconds, their crews reduced to desiccated corpses. Islands were stripped of all vegetation, leaving only barren rock. But the defenders had been trained for this. Paladins projected light barriers that slowed but couldn't stop the life drain. Shamans called upon the elements to attack the entity, earth and fire, and storm-battering tentacles that barely seemed to notice. Mages wove complex rituals, attempting to seal the dimensional breach while the entity was still partially on the other side. The Emperor stood at the heart of the defense, his psychic might blazing like a star. Golden energy poured from him, reinforcing the mage's sealing spells, bolstering the warrior's strength, healing the wounded faster than the entity could kill them. He was everywhere at once, his consciousness divided across 1,000 perspectives, coordinating a defense that should have been impossible for beings of such limited individual power. Anduin fought on the front lines, his father's sword in hand, the light blazing around him as he healed wounded soldiers and smote tentacles that came too close. Beside him, Thrall called upon the elements with shamanic power that shook the earth. Jaina wove arcane magic on a scale she had never before attempted, her power amplified by focusing crystals provided by the Emperor's forges. Tyrande channeled Elune's full might, silver beams cutting through the entity's substance like lasers through flesh. Malfurion drew upon the Emerald Dream, summoning the fury of nature itself against this cosmic predator. Lorthamar and the Blood Elves drained the entity's energy, feeding it to their own magic in a technique the Emperor had taught them specifically for this purpose. The battle raged for hours. Hundreds fell despite the Emperor's coordination, drained of life or crushed by tentacles or driven mad by the entity's alien consciousness brushing against their minds. But slowly, painfully, the mage's sealing ritual approached completion. Then the Emperor did something unexpected. He channeled not just his psychic power, but his very essence into the sealing spell, his consciousness flowing into the ritual and becoming part of it. For a moment, those with magical sight saw him not as a physical being, but as a construct of pure will, a psychic pattern holding reality together through sheer determination. The seal completed with a flash of golden light that could be seen from orbit. The Great Devourer's tentacles were severed, the portions that had entered Azeroth's reality disconnecting from the main body. The entity's rage was palpable as the dimensional breach closed, trapping it on the other side, denying it the world it had come to consume. Silence fell across the maelstrom, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the weeping of those who mourned the fallen. The Emperor's physical form collapsed, his strength temporarily exhausted by the immense effort of channeling his essence into the sealing ritual. Anduin was the first to reach him, kneeling beside the fallen giant. "Emperor, can you hear me?" Golden eyes opened, dimmed but aware. "I can hear you, young king. Did the seal hold?" "It held," Anduin confirmed. "You did it. You saved Azeroth." "We saved Azeroth," the Emperor corrected, his voice weaker than Anduin had ever heard it. "Your forces fought with courage and discipline. The training held. The coordination worked. This is what unified defense achieves." Around them, champions from every race gathered, looking down at the being who had become their supreme commander. In that moment, seeing him vulnerable, exhausted from protecting them, something shifted in the hearts of even his staunchest critics. He had not hung back, had not spent lives carelessly, while preserving his own. He had poured everything he had into the defense, holding nothing in reserve. "Can you stand?" Thrall asked, offering his hand. The Emperor gripped the orc's forearm and allowed himself to be pulled to his feet. "I can stand, and I will continue to stand, for as long as Azeroth needs me." "We know," Tyrande said quietly, and there was a new note in her voice. Not quite acceptance, but something closer to respect. "We saw what you did, how you became part of the spell to ensure it held. You could have died." "Death is irrelevant," the Emperor replied, his strength gradually returning. "Only the mission matters. Only humanity's survival matters. And here, on Azeroth, that survival is intertwined with every race that calls this world home." It was the first time he had acknowledged the value of non-human races without qualification or caveat. The assembled champions noticed, and while it didn't erase months of resentment or philosophical disagreement, it planted seeds of something that might, in time, grow into genuine alliance rather than merely pragmatic cooperation. The casualty reports came in over the following days. 3,000 dead, another 8,000 wounded. Cities had been damaged, fleets decimated, and entire companies of soldiers lost to the Great Devourer's life drain. By any historical standard, it was a catastrophic toll. But the analysts and strategists who studied the battle came to a sobering conclusion. Without the Emperor's coordination, without the unified defense he had organized over 6 months, the death toll would have been 10 times higher, perhaps 100 times higher. The Great Devourer would have broken through completely, and Azeroth itself might have been consumed. The survivors understood this viscerally. They had seen the entity's power, felt its hunger, witnessed tentacles that could drain the life from entire regions, and they had seen how the Emperor's training, his fortifications, his ruthlessly efficient organization had transformed what should have been an apocalypse into merely a terrible battle. Public opinion shifted dramatically. Where before the Emperor had been tolerated as a necessary evil, now he was seen by many as a savior, the supreme commander who had proven his worth in blood and victory. Statues began to appear in cities across Azeroth, not commissioned by any official decree, but erected by grateful survivors who remembered his golden light holding back the darkness. The Emperor observed this shift with mixed feelings. He had not come to Azeroth seeking worship or gratitude. Such things were tools, useful for maintaining morale and securing loyalty, but ultimately hollow. What mattered was that the defensive network had functioned, that his strategies had proven viable, that Azeroth was now better prepared for the next threat, because there would be a next threat. The Great Devourer had been turned back, but not destroyed, and its attack had been detected by other entities lurking beyond dimensional barriers. Predators who now knew that Azeroth was defended, but still vulnerable. They would probe for weaknesses, test the defenses, and eventually attempt their own incursions. 2 weeks after the battle, the Emperor called another summit at the Maelstrom. The assembled leaders arrived expecting a review of the engagement, perhaps some reorganization based on lessons learned. What they got instead was far more significant. The trial period approaches its end. The Emperor began without preamble. "In 2 months, you will vote on whether to continue my command or revoke it. Before that vote occurs, I want to present you with a complete picture of what we face." He gestured, and the air above the platform transformed into a 3-dimensional map of not just Azeroth, but the surrounding cosmos. Points of light indicated worlds, colored overlays showed dimensional barriers, and pulsing red markers highlighted threats. The Great Devourer was merely the most immediate danger, the Emperor explained. Beyond it, there are others. The Void Lords continue their eternal siege against reality itself. The Burning Legion may be broken, but demons are eternal and they will eventually reorganize. The forces I fought in my reality, entities you would call the Chaos Gods, have sensed this world through the connection I represent. They will come. He zoomed the display inward to show Azeroth itself. And here, on your world, dormant threats remain. The old gods may be defeated, but their essence persists. Cthulhu's remnants stir in Ankh-Uraj. Yogg-Saron's influence lingers in Ulduar. Yasharja's heart, though destroyed, left corruption in Pandaria. And in Zoth, as I discovered personally, has not been truly eliminated, but merely dispersed. We killed Enenzoth, Jaina objected. I was there. We destroyed him utterly. You destroyed his physical manifestation, the Emperor corrected. But old gods exist partially outside reality. Their true essence is spread across multiple dimensions. What you killed was his anchor to this world. But fragments of his consciousness remain, waiting for an opportunity to coalesce once more. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. They had thought the old god threat finally ended, the last of the ancient evils vanquished. Now they learned it had merely been postponed. This is what I have been working toward, the Emperor continued. Not just defending against external threats, but eliminating internal vulnerabilities. I propose a crusade, a systematic purging of every old god remnant, every demonic holdout, every corrupted location on Azeroth. We will cleanse this world completely, denying our enemies any foothold they might exploit. That would take years, Velen said, his expression troubled. Decades, perhaps. And the cost in lives would be immense. The cost of not doing it will be extinction, the Emperor replied bluntly. Every remnant of old god influence is a potential vector for future corruption. Every demon cult that remains active is a beacon for Legion forces. Every corrupted site is a weakness in Azeroth's defenses. They must all be eliminated, systematically and thoroughly. Thrall stepped forward, his expression conflicted. What you're describing sounds like the purges of old, when the Horde under demon corruption swept across Azeroth, burning everything in its path. How is your crusade different? Intent and precision, the Emperor answered. The old Horde destroyed indiscriminately, driven by bloodlust and demonic influence. My crusade will target specific threats with surgical precision. Civilians will be evacuated, cultural sites preserved where possible, and collateral damage minimized. But make no mistake, where corruption exists, it will be burned out completely. And who determines what constitutes corruption? Tyrande asked, her voice sharp. The Highborn were once considered corrupt, exiled from Night Elf society for their use of arcane magic. Now they are accepted, valued. What if your definition of corruption eliminates something that could be redeemed? The Emperor met her gaze steadily. That is a fair question, and I do not have a perfect answer. Judgment calls must be made, and some will be wrong. But inaction guarantees catastrophe, while action offers at least the possibility of success. I choose action. Anduin had been silent throughout the presentation, but now he spoke. You're asking for more than military authority now. You're asking for the power to determine the fate of entire regions, entire populations. That goes beyond what we agreed to. Yes, the Emperor acknowledged, which is why I am presenting this now, before the vote, rather than after. You must decide not just whether to continue my command for defense, but whether to expand it to include offensive operations against internal threats. This is too significant a decision to be made without full understanding of what I propose. The debate that followed was intense. Some argued that the Emperor had proven his value and should be trusted with expanded authority. Others contended that offensive operations against internal threats crossed a line from defense to dictatorship. Still others suggested a middle path. Approve the crusade in principle, but require case-by-case approval for specific operations. It was Magni who broke the deadlock, his voice resonating with the World Soul's authority. The World Soul has examined the corruption ye speak of, Emperor. She confirms that old god influence does persist in places, dormant but not destroyed. She also confirms that these remnants grow slowly stronger as dimensional barriers weaken, feeding on the instability you warned about. He paused, his crystalline features grave. She supports your crusade, but with conditions. You'll have a council of advisors, representatives from each major faction, who must approve targets before you strike. You'll have observers from the Earthen Ring to verify that corruption is real and not imagined. And you'll have a mandate to preserve rather than destroy wherever possible. The Emperor considered this acceptable. The Council may occasionally slow operations, but the oversight will prevent the mistakes you fear, Tyrande. Very well. I will operate under these constraints if the vote affirms my continued command. The meeting adjourned with much to consider. In private conversations afterward, leaders struggled with the question of how much authority to grant a being who had demonstrated both the power to save them and the potential to dominate them. Anduin sought out Velen in the days that followed, needing the ancient prophet's wisdom. They met in the Exodar, the Draenei's crashed dimensional ship that served as their capital, surrounded by crystalline technology that hummed with quiet power. Tell me honestly, Anduin asked. What do you see in the futures? Does the Emperor become a tyrant, or does he remain what he claims to be? Velen's expression was troubled. I see both, young king. In some futures, he keeps his word, serves as Azeroth's defender for centuries, then voluntarily steps aside when new threats are defeated. In those futures, Azeroth enters a golden age of prosperity and exploration among the stars. And in the others, Anduin prompted. In others, he cannot let go. Velen said quietly, the threats never truly end. There is always one more enemy, one more crisis, one more reason why his command must continue. Decades become centuries, centuries become millennia, and eventually, Azeroth becomes a mirror of his Imperium. Unified, yes. Powerful, yes. But also cold, rigid. A machine of war that has forgotten what it was meant to protect. Anduin sat in silence, processing this. Which future is more likely? That depends on us, Velen replied. On whether we maintain our independence even while cooperating with his authority. On whether we remind him regularly of what he fights for, not through grand speeches but through living examples. He has existed so long, seen so much horror, that I think he has forgotten what normal life looks like. We must show him. The young king nodded slowly. Then we vote to continue his authority, but never stop challenging his methods. We cooperate, but never submit. We trust, but always verify. Exactly, Velen agreed. The Emperor is not evil, Anduin, but he is ancient beyond reckoning, and the ancients sometimes lose perspective. We must be his anchors to the present, his connection to the people he claims to protect. Similar conversations occurred across Azeroth. In Orgrimmar, Thrall consulted with the spirits and received mixed guidance. In Ironforge, the Dwarven Senate debated for days. In Silvermoon, Blood Elves weighed their recent near disaster against their traditional independence. Every faction, every race, every organization struggled with the same question: trust and risk tyranny, or refuse and risk extinction. The vote came on the appointed day, exactly 1 year after the Emperor had been granted authority. The same assembly gathered at the Maelstrom, this time with even more observers, as word had spread that this decision would shape Azeroth's future for generations. The Emperor stood before them, not speaking, not advocating for himself. He had made his case through actions rather than words. Now he would accept their judgment, whatever it might be. Anduin conducted the vote personally. All in favor of continuing the Emperor's military authority and approving the proposed crusade under the conditions set forth by the World Soul. Signal now. The vote was not unanimous. Several factions abstained, and a few voted outright against. But when the count was complete, the result was clear. 70% in favor, 20% against, 10% abstaining. The motion carries, Anduin announced. Emperor of Mankind, your authority continues for another year, subject to annual review. May you prove worthy of the trust we place in you. The Emperor bowed, a gesture he had rarely made since arriving on Azeroth. I will strive to be worthy, and I swear by the same binding as before, I will serve as defender not dictator. Should I violate that oath? May my own power be turned against me. The psychic binding flared once more, renewing itself, its constraints visible to all with the sight to perceive them. In the months that followed, the Emperor's crusade began in earnest. The first target was Ankh-Kiraj, where Shithun's remnants had begun to coalesce in the deepest chambers beneath the temple. A combined force of Alliance and Horde champions, guided by Earthen Ring observers and advised by the Council, descended into the ancient Karaji city. What they found confirmed the Emperor's warnings. Shithun was not dead, merely dormant, his essence slowly rebuilding itself from the fragments that remained. The battle to destroy these remnants completely took weeks, with mages weaving sealing rituals while warriors held back waves of Kiraji defenders that had remained loyal to their dead god. The Emperor participated personally, his golden light burning through the old god's corruption like fire through dry grass. When the final remnant was destroyed and the sealing complete, he stood in the chamber where Shithun had once reigned and spoke words that echoed through every mind present. This is what we fight for, not glory, not conquest, but the simple right of mortals to live free from the predation of entities that see them only as food or tools. Every old god remnant we destroy, every corrupted site we cleanse, is a victory for life over entropy, for choice over slavery, for hope over despair. The champions who heard these words understood that they were witnessing something rare. A glimpse of the Emperor's true motivation, stripped of strategic calculation or political maneuvering. He genuinely believed in what he was doing, genuinely saw himself as humanity's and now Azeroth's guardian. Whether that belief justified his methods remained an open question, but his sincerity was no longer in doubt. The crusade continued. Yogg-Saron's lingering influence in Ulduar was next, requiring delicate operations around Titan machinery that could not be damaged. Then came the cleansing of Pandaria's Sha-touched sites, working with the August Celestials to restore balance without destroying the spiritual ecosystem. Each operation was scrutinized by the Council, each decision debated, each method questioned. The Emperor chafed under this oversight but adhered to it, recognizing that the constraints served a purpose beyond mere politics. They prevented him from falling into the patterns that had defined his rule in his original reality, patterns of increasing authoritarianism justified by endless emergency. Here, he had to explain, justify, convince. It was frustrating but also refreshing. He found himself in an unexpected conversation one evening with Bane Bloodhook, the Tauren chieftain having sought him out after a successful operation to cleanse corruption from Mulgore. They stood atop Thunder Bluff, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "You're different than when you first arrived," Bane observed. "More patient, perhaps, less certain." The Emperor considered this. "I have been forced to question assumptions I have held for millennia. Your world does not operate according to the rules I learned in mine. Here, diversity has proven to be a strength rather than a weakness. Champions arise from unexpected sources. Solutions come from perspectives I would have dismissed as irrelevant." "Does that mean you've changed your mind about imposing unity?" Bane asked hopefully. "No," the Emperor replied. "Unity remains necessary. But perhaps the form of that unity can be different than what I originally envisioned. Perhaps it need not be the Imperium reborn, but something new. Something that preserves what makes Azeroth strong while eliminating what makes it vulnerable." Bane nodded slowly. "That's all we've been asking for, Emperor. Not the rejection of unity, but unity that respects our differences rather than erasing them." "A difficult balance to maintain," the Emperor noted. "In my experience, such compromises eventually collapse under pressure. But perhaps," he paused, something almost like hope in his ancient voice, "perhaps this time will be different." As the first year of the crusade drew to a close, Azeroth was measurably more secure than it had been. 4 major old god remnants had been eliminated, dozens of demonic cults dismantled, and hundreds of corrupted sites cleansed. The cost had been high, thousands more lives lost in the fighting, but analysts confirmed that the internal threat level had been reduced by nearly 40%. The second annual vote approached with less drama than the first. The Emperor's methods had been proven effective. His respect for the constraints demonstrated, and his value to Azeroth's defense undeniable. The vote was 85% in favor of continuing his authority. But not everyone was pleased with this arrangement. In the shadows, factions that had been harmed by the Emperor's crusade began to organize. Demon cultists who had escaped purges, old god worshippers whose forbidden knowledge had been destroyed, and more surprisingly, mortals who feared what Azeroth was becoming, a world organized for war, its peoples transformed into soldiers in an endless conflict. These disparate groups, united only by their opposition to the Emperor, began to coordinate. They called themselves the Liberation Front, claiming to fight for Azeroth's freedom from tyranny. Their first attacks were small: sabotage of military installations, assassination attempts on collaborators, propaganda campaigns painting the Emperor as the true threat to Azeroth's future. The Emperor's response was measured but firm. He deployed SI-7 and other intelligence organizations to infiltrate the Liberation Front, learn their plans, prevent attacks before they could occur. But he also did something unexpected. He allowed some of their propaganda to circulate, uncensored and unfiltered. Why? Anduin asked, confused by this decision. They're calling you a tyrant, a conqueror hiding behind noble words. Why let them spread these lies? Because they're not all lies. The Emperor replied calmly. Some of their criticisms are valid. Azeroth has become militarized. Traditional ways of life have been disrupted. Some cultures have been irreparably changed by my presence. These are costs that were necessary, but that doesn't mean they're not real, or that people don't have legitimate grievances. So you'll just let them undermine everything we've built? Jaina asked, frustration evident. I will let them speak, the Emperor corrected. Free speech, the exchange of ideas, even criticism of leadership, these are aspects of the freedom you claim to value. If I suppress all dissent, I prove their point about my tyranny. If I allow it, I demonstrate that unity does not require uniformity of thought. It was a calculated risk, and for months it seemed to be working. The Liberation Front's propaganda found some audience but failed to spark widespread rebellion. Most of Azeroth's people, having witnessed the threats the Emperor defended against, were willing to accept his authority despite its costs. Then came the revelation that changed everything. A deep-cover SI-7 agent within the Liberation Front discovered that the organization was not what it appeared. Yes, it included genuine dissidents who opposed the Emperor on principle. But at its core, hidden from even most of its members, was something far more sinister. N'Zoth's influence, the old god's scattered essence working through dupes and pawns to undermine Azeroth's defender. The Liberation Front's leadership consisted of individuals who had been touched by N'Zoth's whispers, their legitimate grievances twisted and amplified, their opposition to the Emperor transformed from principled dissent into existential threat. They didn't know they were corrupted, believed themselves to be acting from noble motives. But their every decision served the old god's purpose, weakening Azeroth from within, while external threats gathered strength without. When the Emperor received this intelligence, he faced a choice that defined the difference between the tyrant he might become and the guardian he claimed to be. He could order a purge, eliminate every member of the Liberation Front preemptively, justified by the corruption at its heart. It would be efficient, effective, and completely destroy any trust Azeroth's people had placed in him. Or he could attempt something more difficult, selective justice, targeting only those actually corrupted while trying to redeem those who had been misled. He called another council meeting, this time presenting the evidence to Azeroth's leaders in full. The Liberation Front is compromised, he explained, but not entirely corrupt. Some truly believe they fight for freedom. Others have been twisted by N'Zoth's influence without realizing it. I must ask, how do you wish me to proceed? The ensuing debate was fierce. Some argued for total elimination, the threat too great to risk mercy. Others insisted on individual judgment, refusing to condemn the innocent along with the guilty. Anduin, speaking with the moral authority of the light, proposed a third path. Bring them in, the young king said. All of them. Offer amnesty to those who surrender willingly. Test them for corruption using the light, the world soul's judgment. Every means at our disposal. Purge only those who are actually corrupted and offer rehabilitation to those who can be saved. It was idealistic, impractical, and would take months to implement properly. It was also the right thing to do. The Emperor studied Anduin for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. We proceed according to your suggestion, young king. But understand, this mercy has limits. Those who refuse to surrender, who continue attacks knowing they may be corrupted, will be met with lethal force. I will not risk Azeroth's security for those who reject the opportunity for redemption. The operation that followed was complex beyond anything the Emperor had orchestrated before. Instead of military assault, it required psychological operations, careful diplomacy, and above all, patience. Teams of priests, paladins, and shamans spread across Azeroth, offering amnesty to Liberation Front members, explaining the corruption at their movement's heart, testing each individual who surrendered. The results were sobering. Of the 5,000 estimated Liberation Front members, perhaps 1,500 were genuinely uncorrupted dissidents who surrendered when offered proof of N'Zoth's influence. Another 2,000 were found to have varying degrees of old god corruption, from mild whispers to complete mental domination. They were subjected to cleansing rituals, some successfully purified, others too far gone to save and granted quick deaths as mercy. The remaining 1,500 refused to surrender, believing the offers of amnesty to be tricks, convinced that the Emperor was the true threat. They fought guerrilla campaigns across Azeroth, forcing military responses that resulted in hundreds of deaths on both sides. It was messy, complicated, and took nearly a year to fully resolve. By the end, the Liberation Front had been dismantled. N'Zoth's lingering influence dealt another serious blow, and Azeroth's people had witnessed something important. The Emperor could have crushed this threat in days through overwhelming force. Instead, he had chosen a slower, more careful path that preserved lives wherever possible. The third annual vote was 90% in favor, but the conflict had taken its toll on the Emperor in ways that weren't immediately obvious. He had become quieter, more introspective, spending long hours alone in his fortress staring at the sky. When Velen visited him during this period, he found the ancient being in an uncharacteristic state, uncertain. I have been thinking about what you said, the Emperor told the Draenei prophet, about futures where I cannot let go, where the emergency becomes permanent. I see the path clearly now. How easy it would be to fall into that pattern. There is always another threat, always another reason why my command must continue. Yes, Velen agreed. That is the trap of necessary tyranny. It begins with genuine crisis and ends with perpetual emergency used to justify permanent authority. In my reality, I sat upon the golden throne for 10,000 years, the Emperor continued. Unable to move, unable to rest, but also unable to delegate or surrender control. I told myself it was necessary, that only I could maintain the Astronomican, guide humanity through the darkness. But was it necessary? Or had I simply become unable to imagine any future without me at its center? Velen sat beside the Emperor, his ancient eyes filled with compassion. These are good questions to ask. The fact that you ask them suggests you are not yet the tyrant you fear becoming. But I could be, the Emperor said quietly. Given time, given enough crises, Given the weight of enough decisions where innocent people die, no matter what I choose, I could become that tyrant. The path is clear, and I have already taken the first steps upon it. Then step off that path, Velen suggested. Set a term limit, not annual but absolute. Tell Azeroth, I will serve as your defender for 10 years, 20, whatever period allows us to eliminate the immediate threats. But after that, I will step down regardless of circumstances, force you to find new leadership, new methods, new solutions that do not depend on my power. The Emperor was silent for a long time, his ancient mind wrestling with concepts that challenged everything he had believed for millennia. Finally, he spoke. 5 years, he said. I will serve as Supreme Commander for 5 years total, measured from my initial appointment. In that time, I will eliminate every old god remnant, establish defensive systems that can function without my constant oversight, and train a new generation of leaders capable of maintaining what I have built. At the end of 5 years, I will voluntarily surrender all authority and become merely an advisor, available when needed but no longer in command. The Council will need to approve such a change, Velen noted. Then we shall ask them, the Emperor replied. And if they refuse, if they insist I remain in command longer, I will refuse. This is my choice, not theirs. I will not become what I fear. The proposal was presented at the next council meeting and caused immediate controversy. Many leaders, having grown comfortable with the Emperor's authority, were reluctant to see it end on a fixed schedule. What if threats remained? What if new crises emerged? What if Azeroth wasn't ready? But others, particularly Anduin and Tyrande, recognized the proposal for what it was. The Emperor voluntarily limiting himself in a way that proved he was not the tyrant they had feared. The debate was passionate, but ultimately resulted in approval. The announcement sent shockwaves across Azeroth. Some celebrated, seeing it as proof that their freedom would not be permanently surrendered. Others worried that 5 years wasn't enough time to prepare for all the threats they faced. But everyone understood that something significant had occurred. The Emperor of Mankind, a being of near infinite power and absolute conviction, had acknowledged limitations and accepted that his rule must end. The final 2 years of the Emperor's command were marked by frantic preparation. Defensive systems were completed across Azeroth, networks of wards and fortifications that could function autonomously. Training programs were established to create a new generation of commanders who understood both the Emperor's strategic principles and Azeroth's unique requirements. Political structures were reformed to ensure that Alliance and Horde could coordinate effectively, even without a supreme authority above them. And the crusade continued. The last major old god remnants were hunted down and destroyed. Y'Shaarj's lingering corruption in Pandaria was finally purged completely. N'Zoth's scattered essence was gathered and sealed in a prison of golden light that the Emperor himself maintained, ensuring the old god could never fully reform. The final major operation of the Emperor's command came in the 5th year, an assault on Ny'alotha itself, the Black Empire's nightmare city that existed between dimensions. It was the source of old god power on Azeroth, the anchor that had allowed their influence to persist even after their physical forms were destroyed. The Emperor led the assault personally, accompanied by champions from every race and faction. They fought through impossible geometries, battled creatures that defied natural law, and ultimately reached the heart of Ny'alotha, where reality was weakest. There, in a chamber that existed in all dimensions simultaneously, the Emperor prepared to seal Ny'alotha permanently, cutting it off from Azeroth forever. But doing so would require anchoring the seal to something stable, something powerful enough to maintain it across dimensional boundaries. Something like himself. "What are you doing?" Anduin demanded as he realized the Emperor's intention. "This seal, it will trap you. You'll be bound to Ny'alotha, unable to leave, forever holding it closed." "Yes," the Emperor confirmed calmly. "It is the only way to ensure the old gods can never return. My consciousness will span the barrier between Ny'alotha and Azeroth, preventing any passage in either direction. It is an acceptable outcome. You'll be trapped here forever, Jaina protested, alone in this nightmare city, holding back the darkness for eternity. Not forever, the Emperor corrected, merely until Azeroth develops the capability to maintain the seal through other means. A century, perhaps two. For one who has existed 40,000 years, that is nothing. But you'll miss everything, Anduin said, emotion thick in his voice. The world you helped save, the peace you helped create, you'll never see the results of what you've built. The Emperor smiled, and it was genuine, perhaps the first truly warm expression he had shown since arriving on Azeroth. I will know they exist. That is enough. I came to this reality to save humanity, to ensure that at least one version of my species would survive and thrive. Through Azeroth's people, that goal has been achieved. The rest is simply details. He began the ritual, golden light flowing from his hands into the fabric of reality itself. The champions watched as his physical form began to dissolve, transforming into pure psychic energy that wove itself into the barrier between dimensions. Remember, his voice echoed as his form faded. Unity does not require uniformity. Strength does not require domination. Defend what you have built, but never forget why you built it. Not for my glory or anyone else's, but for the simple right of all peoples to live, grow, and choose their own destinies. The seal completed with a flash of golden light. When it faded, the Emperor was gone. His consciousness dispersed across dimensional barriers, holding back the old god threat through sheer force of will. The champions stood in silence, processing what they had witnessed, a being of godlike power voluntarily sacrificing everything to protect a world that had feared and resisted him. The return to Azeroth was somber. Word spread quickly. The Emperor had completed his crusade and fulfilled his oath, but at a cost that no one had anticipated. He had not simply stepped down from command. He had removed himself entirely, become a living seal that would protect Azeroth for generations to come. The reactions were mixed. Some felt vindicated, seeing his sacrifice as proof of genuine noble intent. Others mourned, having come to respect or even admire the ancient guardian. Still others felt cheated, as if they had been preparing to oppose a tyrant who had instead become a martyr. In Stormwind, Anduin stood before the assembled leaders of Azeroth for what was supposed to be a victory celebration. Instead, it felt like a wake. The Emperor of mankind came to our world uninvited. He began, his voice carrying across the throne room. He demanded our submission, threatened our freedom, and challenged everything we believed about how Azeroth should be defended. We resisted him, debated him, constrained him, and eventually worked alongside him. And in the end, he taught us something we should have already known, that sacrifice is the truest measure of conviction. He paused, gathering his thoughts. We have 5 years of defensive preparations, strategic knowledge, and trained forces that would not exist without his influence. We also have our freedom, our diversity, our right to choose our own path. He could have taken those things from us permanently. Instead, he gave us the tools to defend ourselves and then removed himself from the equation. The question now, Anduin continued, is what we do with what he built. Do we maintain the unity he forged? Do we preserve the defenses he established? Or do we return to our old ways, fractured and feuding, trusting that we can rise to meet each threat as it emerges? Thrall stepped forward. We maintain what works and adapt what doesn't. The Emperor was right that unity is necessary, but he came to understand that unity doesn't mean we all become the same. The Alliance and Horde remain distinct, but we coordinate our defenses. We preserve our cultures while sharing knowledge. We honor what he built without worshiping him as a savior. There was general agreement. In the years that followed, Azeroth entered a period known as the Golden Peace, not because there were no threats, but because the threats were met with coordinated responses instead of desperate improvisation. The Emperor's defensive networks functioned as designed. His strategic principles were taught in military academies across all factions, and his example, both his power and his ultimate restraint, became a legend that shaped how Azeroth's people viewed leadership and sacrifice. Occasionally, in moments of great crisis, champions would venture to Neolotha's sealed borders and feel the Emperor's presence, his consciousness still spanning the barrier, still holding back the darkness. They would report that he seemed aware, even responsive in some abstract way, as if some part of him monitored Azeroth's progress from his eternal vigil. And in the deepest archives of Stormwind, Ironforge, and Orgrimmar, protected by the most powerful wards Azeroth could create, a single document was stored. It was the Emperor's final message, written in his own hand before the assault on Neolotha, to be opened only if Azeroth faced threats beyond its capability to handle. The message was simple. If you read this, it means I have failed to adequately prepare you, or threats have emerged beyond what I anticipated. I am sorry. Know that my consciousness persists, spanning the barrier I created. If the need is truly dire, if Azeroth faces extinction and no other option remains, gather the greatest psychics of all races and call to me through the seal. I will answer one final time, though doing so will break the barrier and risk old god resurgence. Use this option only as absolute last resort. I trust you to know when that moment has come. Until then, defend your world, preserve your freedom, and never forget, you are stronger than you believe, more capable than you know, and worthy of the future you will build. That is why I came. That is why I stayed. That is why I now remain. For humanity, for Azeroth, for all peoples who choose to stand against the darkness, the Emperor of mankind. Decades passed, then centuries. The seal on Ny'alotha held. Azeroth's people grew stronger, explored further, and eventually began to venture into the cosmos, following the path the Emperor had once envisioned for humanity, but never lived to see realized. And in the space between dimensions, in a city of nightmares held back by Golden Will, the Emperor of mankind maintained his eternal vigil, not as humanity's master, but as its guardian, not demanding worship, but offering sacrifice, not imposing his vision, but enabling Azeroth to discover its own. He had come seeking to rule. He had learned to serve. And in learning that lesson, he had finally found the purpose that had eluded him across 40,000 years. Not to control humanity's destiny, but to ensure humanity had a destiny to control. The Golden Guardian would remain at his post for centuries more, watching through his sealed prison as the world he had helped save flourished, evolved, and eventually surpassed even his highest expectations. He would know satisfaction seeing Azeroth unite not through domination, but through choice, not through fear, but through hope. Not through his eternal authority, but through the strength they had always possessed but never fully recognized. And he would know, in whatever way consciousness knows anything when spread across dimensional barriers, that he had succeeded. Not in the way he had originally intended, not through the Imperium reborn, but through something better. A world that had taken the best of his teachings while rejecting the worst of his methods. Through something he had never truly achieved in his own reality. A civilization that valued both unity and diversity, both strength and compassion, both preparation and freedom. The story might have ended there, with the Emperor's consciousness locked in eternal guardianship and Azeroth entering an age of unprecedented prosperity. But reality, as those who had faced the old gods knew too well, rarely allowed such neat conclusions. 300 years after the Emperor's sacrifice, something changed. It began with reports from warlocks and void-touched individuals across Azeroth. They spoke of dreams, visions of a golden light flickering, dimming, struggling against something vast and hungry that pressed from beyond all known dimensions. At first, these reports were dismissed as the usual madness that afflicted those who trafficked with dark powers. But when the bronze dragonflight confirmed temporal anomalies around Neolotha's sealed borders, when the world soul herself stirred from contemplation with warnings of disturbance. Azeroth's leaders were forced to take notice. In Stormwind, now ruled by Anduin's granddaughter, Queen Tiffin II, an emergency council convened. The chamber was filled with faces both familiar and new. Thrall had long since passed into the ancestors, his great-grandson now leading the Horde. Jaina Proudmoore, sustained by arcane magic and sheer stubbornness, still served as Kirin Tor representative, one of the few remaining who had actually met the Emperor. Velen endured, as ancient Draenei did, his prophetic visions more troubled than they had been in centuries. "The seal is failing," Magni Bronzebeard reported, his crystalline form showing cracks that had not been there before. Not from external assault, but from internal exhaustion. The Emperor's consciousness, vast as it was, is not infinite. 3 centuries of constant vigilance, constant resistance against old god influence, has depleted his strength. "Can we reinforce the seal?" asked Khadgar's successor as Archmage, a brilliant night elf named Stelagosa, in mortal form. "Use our own magic to support what he created?" "We've tried," Jaina said, her voice betraying the weariness of one who had fought too many battles. "The seal is built from his psychic essence. It's not compatible with our magic. Attempting to reinforce it is like trying to weld stone to water. The materials simply don't bind." "Then what are our options?" Queen Tiffin asked, her youthful face belying the weight of leadership she bore. Velen stepped forward, his ancient form moving with the care of one who had lived 28,000 years. "There are 3 paths I see. The first, we do nothing, allow the seal to fail, and face the old god's return with the forces we have spent 3 centuries building. We are stronger now than when the Emperor arrived, perhaps strong enough to prevail. And if we're not?" challenged Gayara's great-granddaughter, war chief of a horde that now included not just orcs, but dozens of races who had joined over the centuries. "Then Azeroth falls to corruption," Velen said bluntly. "The second path, we breach the seal ourselves, attempt to extract the Emperor's consciousness before it fails completely, and seal Neoloda through other means. This risks premature old god resurgence, but might preserve what remains of the Emperor's essence. He would not want that," Jaina said softly. "He chose this fate knowing the cost. To undo his sacrifice would be to waste it. Which brings us to the third path," Velen continued, his eyes glowing with prophetic light. "We open the archives, retrieve the Emperor's final message, and call to him as he instructed. He will answer one last time, but doing so will shatter the seal and release everything he has held back for 3 centuries." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Emperor's message had become legend, a symbol of ultimate contingency that all hoped would never be needed. To use it meant admitting that Azeroth, for all its centuries of preparation and growth, still needed the ancient guardian who had sacrificed everything to protect them. "It feels like failure," Queen Tiffin said quietly. "He gave us 3 centuries of peace to prepare, to grow strong enough to defend ourselves. To call him back suggests we've squandered that gift." "Or," countered Ilaria Windrunner's great-great-granddaughter, also named Ilaria in honor of her legendary ancestor, "it suggests we've finally become wise enough to know when we need help. The Emperor's greatest flaw was believing he had to carry every burden alone. Perhaps our greatest strength is recognizing when we cannot do the same." The debate continued for days. Messages were sent across Azeroth to every faction, every organization, every group that had a stake in the world's future. The question was posed to citizens across the globe: call the Emperor back, or face the old gods alone? The responses revealed how much had changed in 3 centuries. Humans who had never known the Emperor except through history books debated the merits of resurrecting ancient authority versus maintaining modern independence. Orcs who had spent generations building a culture of honor and shamanic wisdom wrestled with whether accepting help from a being who once considered them Xenos represented strength or weakness. But there were other voices too, older voices that carried weight. The aspects, Those who remained spoke in favor of calling the Emperor. They had felt his presence over the centuries, sensed his unwavering vigil, and knew that what they faced was beyond even their restored powers. The World Soul herself, speaking through Magni, confirmed that the old god's stirring represented an extinction-level threat. And then there was the testimony of those few, the very few, who still lived from the Emperor's time. Jaina Proudmoore stood before the assembled council and spoke words that carried the weight of 3 centuries' reflection. "I hated him when he first arrived," she said, her voice still strong despite her incredible age. "I saw a tyrant, a conqueror wrapped in noble justifications, and I wasn't entirely wrong. He was those things, or could have become them. But I also saw him change, saw him learn, saw him ultimately choose sacrifice over dominion. I saw a being who had existed for 40,000 years acknowledge that he didn't have all the answers." She paused, surveying the chamber. "He gave us 3 centuries, not as a gift expecting repayment, but as a parent gives their child time to grow, knowing the child must eventually face the world alone. But just as children sometimes need their parents even after reaching adulthood, so too do civilizations sometimes need the wisdom and power of their guardians. Calling him back is not failure. It's the mature recognition that some threats require united strength across generations." The vote, when it finally came, was 75% in favor of opening the archives and using the Emperor's contingency. The remaining 25% abstained rather than voted against, unable to bring themselves to oppose the measure, but uncertain whether it was truly necessary. The ritual to call the Emperor required the greatest psychics of all Azeroth's races. Priests of the light, void-touched mystics, shamans who communed with the elements, druids who touched the emerald dream, death knights who straddled the line between life and death, demon hunters who had sacrificed their sight for spectral vision, monks who had mastered Chai, and even reformed warlocks who had turned their knowledge of demons toward protective purposes. They gathered at the borders of Neolotha's seal, in a space between dimensions that had been prepared over weeks. At the center of their circle, they placed the Emperor's message, the physical document serving as a focus for the psychic call they would send across dimensional barriers. The ritual began at dawn, led by the greatest priest of the light that the current generation had produced, a Draenei named Zethus, who had studied under Velen for 2 centuries. As one, the assembled psychics opened their minds, their powers, their very essences to call across the void. Emperor of mankind, Zethus's voice resonated with the combined might of 100 powerful minds. Guardian of humanity, defender of Azeroth, keeper of the seal, we call to you in our moment of need, as you instructed we might. The seal fails, the old god stirred, and we require your aid once more. We call not from weakness but from wisdom, not from failure but from recognition that some burdens are too great to be borne alone. Answer us, if any part of you remains to hear." For a long moment, there was only silence. The assembled psychics strained their senses, searching for any response across dimensional boundaries. Some began to fear that the Emperor's consciousness had been too depleted, too scattered by 3 centuries of constant vigilance to answer even this desperate call. Then they felt it. A presence, vast and ancient, stirring from the depths of its vigil. It was like watching a mountain wake up, if mountains could wake. Slowly, ponderously, fragments of consciousness that had been dispersed across dimensional barriers began to coalesce, to remember themselves as a unified whole rather than scattered awareness. The voice that answered was weaker than those who had known the Emperor remembered, but unmistakably his. "I hear you, children of Azeroth. I hear, and I will answer. But know this, to free me is to shatter the seal I have maintained. What I have held back for 3 centuries will be released. Old god essence, nightmare creatures, corrupting influences beyond measure. Are you prepared to face what comes?" "We are," Queen Tiffin responded, speaking for all Azeroth. "We have spent 3 centuries preparing, building on the foundations you laid. We are not the frightened, fractured world you first encountered. We are ready, but we are wise enough to know we need your strength added to our own. A pause, then something that might have been satisfaction in the Emperor's distant voice. Well spoken, young queen. You have learned the lesson I took 40,000 years to master. That seeking help is not weakness, but wisdom. Very well. Stand ready. I released the seal. The golden barrier that had surrounded Neolotha for 300 years began to crack, fractures spreading like lightning across its surface. Through those cracks poured darkness, corruption, madness given form. Creatures that should not exist spilled into reality, and behind them came something worse. The essence of the old gods themselves, finally free to attempt reconstitution after centuries of imprisonment. But Azeroth was ready. The moment the seal shattered, every defensive system the Emperor had established 3 centuries ago activated in concert with new systems developed by Azeroth's people. Fleets converged on Neolotha from across the globe. Champions teleported into strategic positions. Magical barriers erected around population centers. Every lesson learned from 3 centuries of peace and preparation was put into immediate practice. And at the center of it all, the Emperor's consciousness, finally freed from its eternal vigil, began to reconstitute into physical form. Golden light coalesced in the space between dimensions, taking shape, becoming solid. But the form that emerged was not the towering giant who had first arrived on Azeroth, clad in golden armor and radiating overwhelming power. The being who stood before Azeroth's champions was smaller, more human in scale, though still imposing. His armor was simpler, functional rather than ornate. His face, still beautiful in an ageless way, showed lines that had not been there before, marks of exhaustion and something else. Contentment, perhaps, or at least acceptance. I am diminished, the Emperor acknowledged, his voice no longer resonating in multiple dimensions, but merely speaking normally. 3 centuries of constant effort have depleted even my vast reserves. I am perhaps a tenth of what I was when I first arrived. But, he smiled, and it was genuine, I am also more than I was in the way that matters most. I have learned patience, humility, and the value of true cooperation. Come, let us face this threat together, as equals rather than commander and commanded. The battle that followed would be sung about for generations. It was not a battle of one supreme being holding back the darkness while others watched, but a true coalition effort. The Emperor fought alongside Azeroth's champions, his diminished power still formidable but not overwhelming, his strategic genius available as advice rather than commands. He stood beside Queen Tiffin as she channeled the light against nightmare creatures, offering suggestions on how to optimize her spell work without demanding she follow his methods. He fought back-to-back with the current war chief, combining his psychic might with orcish shamanism to create effects neither could achieve alone. He wove spells in tandem with Jaina, the ancient archmage and the ancient guardian, finding a rhythm that blended their vastly different approaches to magic. When old god tendrils, thick as mountains and oozing corruption, emerged from Neolotha's depths, he coordinated the defense not through psychic domination, but through communication, relaying information, highlighting threats, offering options rather than issuing orders. And when one of those tendrils broke through the defensive lines and threatened to crash down upon a battalion of Azeroth soldiers, the Emperor didn't hesitate. He placed himself between the tendril and the troops, his golden light blazing in defiance as he absorbed the impact that should have killed him instantly. He fell to one knee, his armor cracking, golden blood flowing from wounds that wouldn't heal quickly in his depleted state. But the soldiers lived, and they rallied, pouring fire and magic into the tendril until it retreated, smoking and writhing. Emperor, Queen Tiffin reached his side, her healing magic flowing over him. Why did you do that? You could have called for evacuation, given the troops time to retreat. He looked up at her, his ancient eyes showing something that might have been surprise at the question. Because they were in danger, and I could protect them. Is that not what guardians do? It was such a simple answer, so obvious, yet it revealed everything about how much he had changed. The Emperor who had first arrived on Azeroth might have calculated acceptable losses, might have prioritized overall strategy over individual lives. This Emperor, diminished in power but expanded in understanding, had chosen differently. The battle raged for 3 days. Slowly, painfully, Azeroth's forces pushed back the corruption spilling from Neolotha. The old god's essence, trying to reconstitute, was disrupted again and again by coordinated strikes that the Emperor helped plan but did not execute alone. Nightmare creatures were driven back, sealed, destroyed. The corruption was contained, cleansed, neutralized. And finally, when the last old god tendril had been severed and the last nightmare creature banished, the champion stood before Neolotha itself, the nightmare city that existed between dimensions, source of all old god corruption on Azeroth. It must be destroyed, the Emperor stated. Not sealed, not contained, but completely annihilated. Otherwise, this will simply repeat in another few centuries. Can it be done? Asked Velen. Neolotha exists partially outside reality. To destroy it would require unraveling its existence across multiple dimensions simultaneously. It can be done, the Emperor confirmed. But it will require power on a scale that even my full strength could barely achieve. In my current state, he gestured at his wounded, diminished form, I cannot do it alone. Then we will do it together, Queen Tiffin said firmly. Show us how. What followed was the greatest collaborative magical working in Azeroth's history. The Emperor provided the theoretical framework, the understanding of how to attack a multi-dimensional structure. Azeroth's mages, shamans, priests, and mystics provided the raw power and their own unique perspectives on how to implement that theory. They worked for weeks, refining the spell, gathering power, preparing for one single devastating strike that would shatter Neolotha across all dimensions simultaneously. And when the moment came, when every element was in place, they struck as one. The Emperor channeled the working. His consciousness once again expanded to span dimensions, but this time he was not alone. Hundreds of powerful minds worked with him, supporting him, adding their strength to his. Their diverse approaches to magic creating a tapestry of power more intricate than anything he could have woven alone. Neolotha screamed as it died, reality itself convulsing as the nightmare city was torn apart across dimensions. Old god essence that had persisted since the Black Empire's fall, corruption that had survived countless purges, malevolence that had endured for millions of years. All of it was burned away in a conflagration of combined might. When the light faded, Neolotha was gone. Completely, utterly, in all dimensions simultaneously. The source of old god power on Azeroth had been eliminated. Not sealed or contained, but genuinely destroyed. The Emperor collapsed, his form flickering, barely maintaining cohesion. The champions rushed to support him, but he waved them off weakly. I am not dying, he managed, but I am fading. The effort of spanning dimensions again, even briefly, even with your support, has depleted what little I had left. I will not recover from this. My time on Azeroth ends here. No, Jaina said, her voice breaking. She had lived 3 centuries to see this moment, to witness the Emperor's final battle. We can help you recover. Our magic, our healers, anything you need. The Emperor smiled at her, and it was gentle, fond even. Jaina Proudmoore, you have been my conscience and my critic for 300 years, first in person and then in memory. I could ask for no finer legacy than to have earned your respect. But this is not defeat, it is completion. I came to save humanity, to ensure survival. I have done that. What more could any guardian ask? To live to see what you helped create flourish, Queen Tiffin said, tears streaming down her face. To rest, to finally know peace. I will know peace, the Emperor assured her. My consciousness will fade, disperse into the same dimensions I have protected. I will become part of the fabric of reality itself, no longer a unified being but a pervasive presence. In a way, I will be everywhere and nowhere, finally free of the burden of singular existence that I have borne for 40,000 years. Velen stepped forward, placing a hand on the Emperor's shoulder. I have seen this end in my visions. You will not truly die, but transform, become something new. And in the distant future, when Azeroth faces threats we cannot yet imagine, your essence will stir, will provide inspiration and strength to those who need it. You will be a guardian still, but no longer one who must carry the burden alone. The Emperor's form began to fade, golden light dimming to a gentle glow. Tell them, he said, his voice growing distant. Tell Azeroth's people that I was honored to serve, honored to learn from them, honored to have been proven wrong about so many things I thought I knew. Tell them that humanity's future, all of Azeroth's future, is brighter than even I dared hope. Tell them, his form dissolved completely, golden particles of light drifting upward like reverse rain. Where each particle touched, reality itself seemed to strengthen. Dimensional barriers that had been weakened by millennia of conflict becoming stable once more. The Emperor's essence, no longer concentrated in a single being, spread throughout Azeroth and beyond, becoming a pervasive protective influence rather than a singular authority. In the silence that followed, the assembled champions stood with bowed heads, not in worship but in respect. They had witnessed the end of a being who had existed since before human civilization, who had guided countless worlds, who had made terrible choices and learned from terrible mistakes, who had ultimately found redemption not through power, but through sacrifice. He called himself the Emperor of Mankind, Queen Tiffin said softly, speaking to the assembled masses through magical projection. But in the end, he became something greater, a guardian of all peoples, a defender who learned that true strength comes not from domination, but from cooperation. He came to rule and instead learned to serve. He came with answers and instead learned to ask questions. He came alone and learned that no one, no matter how powerful, should bear every burden themselves. She paused, looking around at the thousands who had fought in this final battle, representatives of dozens of races, hundreds of factions, all united by common purpose rather than imposed authority. He gave us 3 centuries to grow, to learn, to become strong enough to stand alongside him rather than behind him. And when we called him back in our moment of need, he came not as our master, but as our ally. That is his legacy, not conquest or domination, but the understanding that unity of purpose does not require uniformity of being. The crowd responded not with cheers, but with silence, the reverent quiet of those who understand they have witnessed something profound. Then, slowly, they began to sing, not a victory hymn or a funeral dirge, but something new, composed spontaneously by a Tauren bard and picked up by others, a song of guardianship, of sacrifice, of the burden shared rather than borne alone. The song spread across Azeroth in the days that followed, carried by those who had fought and those who had watched, translated into 100 languages but retaining its essential message. Children would learn it in schools alongside the history of the Emperor's arrival, his struggle, his sacrifice. Leaders would sing it when making difficult decisions, reminding themselves that no one should bear all burdens alone. Champions would hum it when facing impossible odds, drawing strength from the memory of one who had faced such odds for 40,000 years and never surrendered. In the years that followed, Azeroth entered what historians would call the Second Golden Age. The old gods were truly gone, not sealed or imprisoned, but destroyed utterly. The dimensional barriers were stable, reinforced by the Emperor's dispersed essence. And the lessons learned from 3 centuries of his influence, both direct and indirect, had transformed how Azeroth's peoples approached conflict and cooperation. Alliance and Horde remained distinct factions, but the competition between them was channeled into productive rivalry rather than destructive warfare. Disputes were settled through negotiation backed by the understanding that neither side could afford to weaken the other too much. When threats emerged, they were met with coordinated responses that honored the emperor's strategic principles without requiring his authority to implement them. New institutions arose, built on the foundations he had laid, but evolved beyond them. The Defenders' Covenant united military forces across all factions, not under a single commander, but through mutual agreement and shared command structure. The archive of 10,000 years preserved not just the Emperor's knowledge, but also the wisdom developed by Azeroth's peoples over millennia. The Council of Guardians, made up of champions from every race and faction, maintained vigilance against threats while remaining accountable to those they protected. And sometimes, in moments of great crisis or profound decision, leaders would report feeling a presence, a gentle sense of support or guidance that had no physical source. Scholars debated whether this was genuinely the Emperor's dispersed essence manifesting, or merely psychological comfort from believing he still watched over them. Most eventually concluded it didn't matter. The effect was the same either way. Jaina Proudmoore lived another decade after the Emperor's dispersal, finally allowing herself to rest after 3.5 centuries of vigilance. On her deathbed, surrounded by friends and students who spanned multiple generations, she reportedly smiled and spoke her final words. He learned. In the end, he finally learned. That's all any of us can hope for. Velen persisted, as ancient Draenei did, witnessing the flourishing of the world the Emperor had helped save. In his final prophetic visions before surrendering to age at 29,000 years old, he reported seeing distant futures where Azeroth's people spread throughout the cosmos, not as conquerors but as explorers and peacekeepers, carrying forward the lessons learned from a being who had come to conquer and stayed to serve. The world soul herself, Azeroth, eventually reached maturity and took physical form, becoming a titan of unprecedented power and unique philosophy. She rejected the Pantheon's hierarchical approach, instead advocating for the value of diversity, the strength in cooperation between unequal powers, the importance of choice even when choice led to conflict. The other titans, observing her success and the thriving civilization that had nurtured her awakening, began to reconsider their own methods. Centuries became millennia. Azeroth's peoples did indeed spread to the stars, not as a unified empire, but as a coalition of independent cultures bound by common values and mutual defense pacts. They encountered other civilizations, some friendly, some hostile, all unique, and they approached each encounter with a question the Emperor had taught them to ask. How can we cooperate while respecting our differences? It was not a perfect philosophy. There were failures, conflicts, tragedies, but the overall trajectory was clear. A civilization that valued both unity and diversity, both strength and compassion, both preparation and freedom. A civilization that understood guardianship as service rather than domination, protection as cooperation rather than control. And in the deepest archives, protected by the most powerful wards Azeroth could create, another document was stored alongside the Emperor's final message. This one was written by Queen Tiffin shortly before her own death, addressed to whatever distant future might need its wisdom. The Emperor of mankind came to us from a reality of darkness, carrying methods forged in endless war. He came believing he had all the answers, that only his way could save humanity. But he learned. He changed. He ultimately understood that the question was not, how do I save humanity, but how do we save each other? The greatest leader is not the one who has all the answers, but the one who is willing to learn. The greatest power is not the ability to dominate, but the strength to sacrifice. The greatest empire is not one built through conquest, but one formed through choice. These are the lessons the Emperor taught us, often against his will, sometimes despite his intentions, but always through his example. If you are reading this, you face challenges we cannot imagine. The cosmos is vast and threats are endless, but remember, you are not alone. You have inherited not just the Emperor's knowledge but Azeroth's wisdom, and the two together are stronger than either alone. Trust in cooperation over domination, seek help rather than bearing all burdens yourself, and remember that unity of purpose does not require uniformity of being. The Emperor's greatest gift was not his power but his willingness to be wrong, to learn, to change. May we all have such courage when our certainties are challenged. In the present day, millions of years after these events, Azeroth remains thriving and diverse. The Emperor's name is remembered not as a conqueror or even precisely as a savior, but as something more nuanced, a being who came to impose his will and learned instead to offer his service, who sought to rule and discovered the greater honor in guardianship, who believed himself necessary and learned that while this was true, he was not sufficient alone. Statues of him stand in cities across Azeroth and worlds beyond, but they are peculiar statues. Unlike typical monuments to great leaders, these show the Emperor not in triumph, but in transformation, a towering figure of gold gradually fading into light, his hands not raised in dominance but extended in support, his expression not commanding but content. And inscribed on every such statue, in all languages of all peoples who remember his story, is a simple phrase that captures both what he was and what he learned to become. For humanity, for Azeroth, for all who choose to stand. Not a command, not a proclamation, just a statement of purpose, offered freely to any who would accept it. The Emperor of mankind had come to World of Warcraft, and in the end, both he and Azeroth were changed by the encounter. He taught them the value of unity and preparation. They taught him the worth of diversity and choice. And together, guardian and guarded, teacher and student, ancient power and young civilization, they proved that even beings who have existed for 40,000 years can learn new lessons, and that the greatest strength comes not from standing above others, but from standing alongside them. The cosmos continued its eternal dance. Threats rose and fell, civilizations flourished and faded. But on one world, orbiting a medium-sized star in an unremarkable galaxy, a unique experiment in cooperative civilization persisted, thrived, and eventually became a beacon for others seeking a path between tyranny and chaos. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between crises, those with the gift to perceive such things would sense it. A presence, vast but gentle, dispersed but aware, no longer concentrated in a single being, but woven into the fabric of reality itself. Watching, protecting, guiding when asked, supporting when needed, but never commanding, never imposing, never demanding. The Emperor's vigil continued, transformed from lonely burden to shared purpose, from singular power to collective strength, from "I will save you" to "let us save each other." And that, more than any conquest or any display of power, was his true victory. The end of the Emperor's story was not an ending at all, but a beginning. The beginning of something better than he had ever built in 40,000 years of trying. Not humanity's empire, but Azeroth's example. Not the Emperor's reign, but the world's choice. For humanity, for Azeroth, for all who choose to stand.